So, I'm going to tell you the story of my brief encounter with a man called Happy. And even though it happened around 9 years ago, sometimes he still crosses my mind, especially on gloomy, overcast days in LA, just like the day that I met him. 2013. I'm working at a cannabis dispensary in Venice Beach, a block from the boardwalk. A good 35% of our patrons were unhoused people. Occasionally, someone experiencing severe psychosis would try to come in, but if they were screaming or unintelligible, security would just not let them in. If they had and presented the holy trinity of medical papers, ID and cash, they were good to go. We had a compassion program where we'd bag up grams of shake left over the bottoms of jars and give them completely free, one per person per day, to anyone who asked. Word about this spread quickly on the boardwalk. Generally, these people would be the nicest, most polite and considerate customers, even if they did smell a bit stinky and their money got pulled out of a sweaty sock or something. No one working there would bat an eye if somebody came in smelling like they'd slept on the beach for a week next to a bottle of vodka, as long as they just calmly buy their weed and they would be on their way like any other customer. So, it's a foggy, chilly day around the holidays, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone called out, so I was the only one in the back, bud tending. There was another employee at reception and the security guard at the front door. I'm alone in the back room. There are cameras, but no one is actively watching them. This guy walks in after getting checked in at the front, and he's the only customer at the moment. And I swear that the whole room gets colder as he walks in. He is wearing a very thin, deeply faded, wrinkled, conformed to his body, floor-length leather duster jacket, and a similar beaten-up, wide-brimmed leather cowboy hat. It honestly looked like maybe he'd lived and slept in these same clothes for years. We didn't allow hats, hoods, or sunglasses in the store, so I'm surprised that security didn't make him take off his hat. This man is at least 6'5" and built like a boulder. Not obese kind of large too. I mean, pick you up and toss you like a ragdoll large. The stench that comes with him is honestly unlike anything that I'd ever smelled before or since. It was beyond BO. Beyond anything, really. It sort of smelled like actual death. As if he had raw, rotting carcasses tucked under his thick, long leather coat. I thought that I had been hardened by plenty of nasty body odor stinks before, but this was absolutely revolting. Far beyond anyone who hadn't showered lately or had even wet their pants or something. I'm trying not to inhale very deeply, and I say, "Hi sir, excuse me. I'm sorry, would you mind taking off your hat? It's just store policy." Big customer service smile. "So, what are you looking for today?" He sort of grunts deeply. He's walking very slow, shuffling and dragging his feet. His voice sounds like he gargles with gravel, rough and wet, raw and angry. "I don't take off my hat." At this point, I'm not trying to argue with this man about his hat either. Let's just get him in and out. I glance down and see that he's not wearing any shoes. The bit that I can see from under his coat, one of his ankles is massively purple, black and swollen, melon-sized. The bottoms of both of his feet are bloody and tore up. I realize that he is leaving a slight trail of blood as he drags his ragged feet across the concrete floor of the shop. My first thought is, how and why did security let this guy come in? Second is that this guy is obviously seriously injured, and that is concerning as a human being. I'm making sure to keep the display shelf between me and this guy, but that's only about a foot of space, like a bar. He gets to me, and the stench gets stronger. I meekly but sincerely ask, "Are you alright, sir?" His eyes flare at me. "What do you care?" And I'm like, "Well, I tried. Not my chair, not my problem. Not my monkeys, not my circus. Great, what can I get for you? He pulls up one of his sleeves to expose his forearm. It is covered in large, round burns like from a cigar. Some old, healed, and some fresh, and really infected and pussy. It's not track marks, too. It's definitely burns. He also has a jagged, homemade-looking stick and a poke tattoo of a smiley face, a crooked circle, 2 lines for eyes, and a sort of scabbed-up curve of a smile. He points at his tattoo. Happy. My name's Happy. The rotting stink was so strong that I needed to breathe little gasps and the least possible that I could. I walked here. I walked all the way here from Pasadena. I'm like, wow, sir, that's a very long walk. Anyway, what are you looking for today? Just for you. His eyes are dark and menacing. He is smeared with a layer of grime, like he lives in the woods dirty. He doesn't look like the average crust punk or disabled veteran that you generally see living on the beach. It was hard to guess his age, but he wasn't that old or young, somewhere between 30 to 50. Honestly, he looked like he dragged himself here from his log cabin, like what would happen if you entangled some quantum mechanics poorly and mixed Ed Gein with an 1800s homesteader, then transported him to 2013 Venice Beach. I, of course, have never seen this man before. Once was more than enough to make him unforgettable, though. He keeps staring at me, and I move as far back as I can to the wall, hopefully out of his grasp if he lunged. I would need to walk out from behind the case and around him to get to the security. I'm honestly weighing my options at this point. I decide to grab a bunch of compassion grams, and then I weigh out an eighth and mark it down. I'd pay it for later. And he's still just leering at me, wheezing heavy, stinky breaths. So, we actually have a special today, only for people who walked more than 10 miles to get here. This is all for you, on the house. Thank you for stopping by. He accepts the bag, but continues to just stand there and stare at me. Thank you, Happy. It worked. He grunts a guttural noise that is not a word, and slowly turns to shuffle back towards the door. At the door, he turns back towards me and says, I'll see you later. He finally walks out after, leaving plenty of his residual stench of death behind. Thank any and all of the gods, I did not see Happy later, or ever again. When I asked security why the heck did they let him in, he said that when he had noticed his bloody feet and said, Hey bro, you all good? That looks like it hurts. Happy had stepped up in his face and threatened to choke you out. Stupid N-word. And since it was just him and 2 22-year-old, 130-pound girls, he wasn't trying to die tonight and figured hopefully Happy could just get his stuff and leave. He was watching the camera in the back ready to call the police and the owners if anything got weird. But apparently, we had different definitions of weird. I understood his reaction and ultimately we were all fine. Just spooked and creeped out, thankfully. And now, needing to clean blood off the floor with bleach and gloves, and texting our boss that he definitely owed us some free weed after that. He agreed, and ironically enough, we all lived happily ever after. I'll try to keep this as accurate as possible, but it's been shoved deep in my memory bank for years now, and certain details are fuzzy, but this is what I remember. So, a little over a decade ago, I was working for the local cable or internet company. I was fresh out of high school, and it was my first real job. I should mention too that sometime in my preteen years, I developed a habit of snooping through people's things. Whether it was at a family member's house or friends, I would always manage to slip away into people's rooms, closets, bathrooms, etc., looking for secrets and hidden items and whatnot. I would never steal anything, of course, just take mental notes of things that I found and put them back without leaving a trace. So, as you can imagine, landing a job that placed me in people's houses to install cable was, well, almost guaranteed to stir up a desire to indulge in my long-forgotten habit. When installing wires for TVs and computers, I would often end up in crawl spaces, closets, behind desks, and sometimes under beds to reach outlets and such. I'd stumble on things like collections of sexually explicit material, embarrassing personal hygiene products, and more than a few times, extremely large collections of, well, toys, if you catch my drift. After a while, it went from stumbling upon these things to outright looking for them. Most homeowners were too lazy to follow me from room to room, so they'd either be downstairs or outside in the yard while I went about doing my job. Like I said, I wasn't taking anything with me, just observing. Now, about 4 or 5 months into me working this job, I ended up at a woman's house. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, I would guess, white with sandy blonde hair and a sort of hippie bohemian vibe that was popular around my area, mixed with a bit of emo, a weird combo, I know. But she had a pretty big house for a single person, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths and multiple living areas, but it appeared that she was the only one living there, other than her cat, who would occasionally run by as I was doing my job. But she let me know that she'd be outside on her porch, and to let her know if I needed anything. The house was quiet and big, so I knew that I would be able to hear her coming, and have plenty of time to clean up if I happened to do some snooping around. It was the perfect storm. All in all, though, it was pretty uneventful, to be honest. I carried on with my work, but I'd every so often take a peek around at her things. She was pretty hot to me, so I probably would have been excited to find something that would allude to her sexual side, but there was no such luck. Just papers, knickknacks, some stuff that appeared to be schoolwork. But peeking out from her pillow was a notebook, similar to the old cow print ones that we'd use in school. I knew for sure, given the placement, that it had to be a diary of some sort. I looked around to make sure that she was still outside, and then I cracked it open. It was boring. The first few pages were random notes, planning, grocery lists, far from the scandalous journaling and one-night stands that I'd hoped for. But just as I was about to put it back, I turned the page and I saw a few words that caught my eye. Something along the lines of panic, anxious, safe. And so, with concern and some excitement, I wanted to read a detailed story written in first person about her hitting a man over the head, realizing that he wasn't conscious any longer, recruiting help cleaning up the mess, and dumping the body in a nearby river. She also journaled about the anxiety and paranoia that she was feeling about everything that happened, and the stress of sharing the secret with the person who had helped her dump the body. I remember being extremely uneasy and feeling more creeped out in that house every minute that passed by. The silence of the house that I had previously found peaceful, it really started to bother me. Even the jingling of the cat's collar was beginning to haunt me a bit, like something out of a horror movie. I was terrified that I'd get caught and that she'd take me out to ensure that I wouldn't tell about what I'd read, but I managed to power through the job and I just got the heck out of there. On the drive home, I managed to convince myself that I probably just stumbled on her notes or an excerpt from some fictional novel that she was writing or something. It did read more like a novel than a personal diary passage, but honestly, there's just no telling. I laughed it off with a few friends later on, and I never really spoke much about it again. It's been so long now that I can barely remember the woman's face, her house, or even the town. But what I do remember, clear as day, is being very thankful that I never had to go back there again. Recently, I, a 24-year-old female, was living in a woman's shelter and I made some really good friends there. We used to sit at this park across from a temple at night and drink or smoke or whatever. We'd be there for hours listening to my music, just having fun and talking about our lives. We were all quite young in the group, early 20s. I should say too that we were all there due to a fair amount of trauma in our lives, and we connected through that a lot. One night, my friends and I went to a party in the city where we had been drinking for hours and weren't tired when it was over. So when me and my closest friend there, 22-year-old female, got back to the shelter, we decided to go sit in the park and watch the sunrise and drink a bit more. We're there for a little while and we suddenly hear R&B or rap music coming from the temple across the street. I might add that we are both mixed black girls and we were pretty tipsy, so we thought that it would be a strange adventure to go over there to see who was playing my favorite song so loud in the morning. It could be a potential friend, or maybe we'd just learn about the place. Whatever the case, it was a beautiful temple. So we walked over and the gates were locked. We were disappointed, but a man comes out to greet us and said that we could come in and see the temple. He said that it was his music and that he loves that we like the same music. So we go in and he sort of shows us around. It's beautiful in the bottom, but we also notice a lot of rooms with beds, and he tells us that if we ever wanted to rent rooms that we could for unbelievably cheap. We thought that being homeless girls with not much work, that it was really an amazing opportunity, almost too good to be true. At first too, I felt nothing but positive vibes. He shows us his computer that's playing the music and asks what songs that we would want to hear. I get comfortable with this guy. He was funny and we all sort of got along pretty well. We're talking about recreational activities that rhymes with weed, and so we had some and we offered it to him because he was just really cool and chill. He then says that he'll pack ours with our stuff, and that will be more important later. I should add too that he was constantly complimenting me specifically. My hair, my skin color, and saying all really forwarded compliments that made me a bit uncomfortable. He started asking if I like Asian men and if I had ever slept with one. He was of Eastern Asian descent. I'm not sure where though, but he then went on to ask more questions about my sexual preferences and told us that he would give very bad drugs, don't think that I can say it, to girls to smoke and have sex with them, drugs no one should ever do. He also said that he sees us sitting at the park sometimes through the window, and all of that was becoming a pile of red flags. He then said as we were smoking that if we had another friend, we can also take his room because he's moving soon, and that was when I got a weird feeling, so I decided to ask him why he was leaving if the rent was so cheap. He wouldn't answer, just dodging the question, and my intuition was telling me that something was wrong. It's ridiculous it took so long, but I asked if I could have some water, and he said to get the one out of the fridge. I went out, and there was another guy there, and he was nice and offering me the water, but I decided to get a glass and use the tap instead. He runs out of the room my friend was in and says, "No, the one from the fridge." And I said, "I'm fine with this." He walks me back to the room and I sit back down next to my friend. He then went on to say, "I'm moving because I hear people screaming and having orgies at night, noises banging on my door, sounds of people being tortured and hurt, and it disturbs my sleep." And I mean, like, what, right? It was almost like it accidentally slipped out, what he had just said. I almost thought that it was a joke, to be honest. I asked him if it was nightmares, ghosts, or real people that are making these noises at night, and he just continued to dodge my questions. I asked why on earth he didn't tell us this earlier. We were honestly in disbelief, and he continued to ignore what we were saying and acting really strange. I then noticed that he had closed the door when I came back in earlier, and I started to think that we actually needed to get out of here because this was getting dangerous. He then said, "You have to listen to this song, you'll love it." It gets worse though. he puts on this terrifying sort of chant or Viking-like song and plays it really loud, too loud, and he's chanting this song so loud that we're yelling at him to turn it off, but he just doesn't listen. The video is Viking, like people killing other people or something, and we're begging him to turn it off because it's terrifying, and why would he or anyone like that sort of thing? I mean, it was barely music. He turns his face to us fast and screams maniacally with his teeth showing. His tongue was out and his eyes were wide too. It was the most distorted face that I'd ever seen. He didn't look human, in fact. No sane person would act like that anyway. My fight or flight response isn't really all that good, so I sat there laughing, sort of just frozen in fear, I guess. My friend, on the other hand, was in fight mode. She threatened to beat this guy up if he didn't let us out right now. I ran to the door and he ran at me, so I froze in front of him and he went to open the door because it was locked. We started running out of the house while he laughs maniacally, speed walking behind us. We bolted out and, mind you, I'm still trying to laugh it off, but it was the beginning of the worst panic attack that I'd ever had. If my friend wasn't there in fight mode, I genuinely don't know what would have happened to me. I mean, the way that he changed so quickly, his movements and mannerisms, the way that his face just didn't look human anymore, and how naive we were to go in there in the first place because it seemed like an innocent temple. We didn't get many answers from this situation because, well, quite frankly, we were just too scared to go back or cause problems, which I know is pretty stupid. We don't know if he was truly troubled or if there were actually people there getting hurt, killed and tortured or having orgies or whatever, but it scared me. It scared me to think about the fact that he knew that we were homeless, vulnerable girls at the time, that he may have lured us in with the music that he hears us play. We also were completely tripping because he laced our stuff. I don't think that I can say on here what my friend believed it was, but it was the worst experience that we had ever had. I highly doubt that those girls that he spoke about in the beginning were there consensually. Let me say that much. When I was 10, my parents decided to move us into an old funeral home. Now, in this house for the 5 years that I lived in it, I'd had some experiences and unexplainable things happen. However, I'm only going to list some that just really stuck with me. So when we first moved into the house, the new owners kept only one item from back when it was a funeral home, and it was the organ. This organ was huge, mind you, and very old. I don't know if it's been there the whole 60 years that the funeral home was standing, but I do know that it had to be in there for a long time. I remember my father saying that we were never to touch it, and being the destructive children that we were, I could understand. So we just never did. However, it did. Let me explain. It started one night early in the evening. The eerie sound of it being played. The sound of the organ was just hauntingly beautiful. Being a child, of course, I'm thinking that my brothers are pulling a prank on me and probably going to get in trouble. However, after the first night, it continued. So one night, me and my sister had to catch our brothers in the act, as they swore that they weren't playing it. So when it played again, we went down the stairs ready to bust them, so to speak, only to find that once the music stopped, nobody was there. Now, the funeral home was mostly renovated into an actual house, mostly the downstairs because that used to be where grieving families said their last goodbyes to their loved ones. They really tried to erase a history of it ever being one. All of it except the basement. Now, the basement used to be the place where they prepared the dead bodies, apparently. Now, let me be clear too that they didn't leave the equipment or table or anything down there. This isn't a haunting in Connecticut or something. However, they didn't try to really change up the basement at all either. It was a sort of dark tunnel-like basement with it starting at the entrance. Used to be an office area for the actual house, I think. It was a downslope, like a downward hill from the front to the back, and it was creepy to say the least, so I just never really went in there. My parents used it for storage though, and one day my dad asked me to go down there to grab something. I really can't remember what it was, but it was important at the time. So I went down there with a flashlight in hand, because only one light was in there, and I started going through the boxes and rummaging around. As I was looking, I just all of a sudden felt this really weird feeling, almost like I was being watched or something. I brushed it off, of course, and continued, until all of a sudden the temperature in that place just plummeted. It was a hot July day, and it just felt breezy all of a sudden. My hair stood up on ends, and that was when I heard it. It was all I can describe as an unnatural sound. No words to be made out, just a gaggle-like sound in my ear, right next to me. I can tell you, though, that I spun around so fast that I'm surprised I didn't get whiplash to see nothing. But at that, I ran. I ran for dear life up the ramp-like pavement to the used-to-be store-like front, and I just refused to ever go back down there. Now, I can say the worst part of living there was the nighttime because of the nightmares. Mostly every night. I really wouldn't remember all of them, just know that I would wake up screaming and scared to go back to sleep. One time I did remember though, and, well, I remember the voice. I was dead asleep and I was woken up by a loud voice screaming, "Wake up!" Looked around my room, but nobody was there. My father would say that it was just night terrors, but till this day in my heart, I know that it wasn't just a dream. Mind you, this is just a few experiences, but this house, it made me believe in the paranormal. It made me believe that there are some things in this world that just cannot be explained yet. I don't know if the house is still there, but I do wonder sometimes and hope that the lost souls, if that's what they were, in that house, that they found peace. So I started a new job a few months ago as a third shift technician in some older skyscrapers in my city. Before I was even hired, during my interview, I was asked by who is now my boss, "Do you have any aversions to ghosts or paranormal stuff?" I sort of chuckled and assumed that it was a joke, so I didn't answer immediately. After a few seconds, though, I realized that he was serious and double-checked. "Oh, actually, no, I'm not averse to stuff like that," I said. He explained that third shift tends to see or hear things, but assured me that nobody has ever been harmed. I have always been a bit skeptical, I guess, of anything paranormal, enjoying and entertaining the ideas, but not fully believing due to a lack of evidence in my personal experience. After my onboarding and meeting my co-workers, I followed up on that line of thought though, sort of weighing if they believed in the paranormal prior to working here or not, what their experiences were, etc. Aside from one other newer guy, everyone has had experiences with stuff in the buildings apparently. I went through my training and was taught a lot about the history of the area and the buildings. A fun fact too, my office is 2 stories below the ground and about 10 feet below a graveyard that was relocated to make room for the tower, maybe about 100 years ago. I'm sure that that's not important though, right? Anyway, I would say about 2 to 2.5 months ago, I got off training and went to my normal shift working overnight. My co-worker has been on this shift for over a decade now and has an incredible insight into the details of these buildings. He explained that he's only ever seen stuff once, but it's fairly routine to hear shrill screams or to have your clothing and hair pulled even. The part that amuses me in hearing these accounts from my co-workers is that we're all blue-collar workers, most in their 50s and 60s, and with the most nonchalant matter-of-fact recounting of what they've seen. My co-worker took me through a tour of the building and showed me a spot on a floor of the building where, apparently 6 years prior, he was walking the floor as a part of an hourly fire watch, and due to maintenance going on that floor, that disabled the fire suppression system. As he disembarked the elevators and went north, a short lady, under 5 feet tall, he didn't recognize, was coming down the hallway from the door that leads to the offices. At first, he jumped, as we all do, right? Given these buildings are empty, except for us and security. And once he collected himself, he said hello, that he didn't recognize her, and asked to see her employee badge, which is routine for us. She just let out a high-pitched, shrill sort of cackle. He sort of likened it to an old Hollywood witch's cackle, and she walked away around the corner. On the other side of the floor, he bumped into maintenance guys and asked them if they had seen this lady and who she worked for. On the other side of the floor, he bumped into maintenance guys and asked them if they had seen this lady and who she worked for, but they hadn't seen her at all. After this fire watch round, he went and asked the security desk, but they said that nobody had come in or out, aside from him and maintenance. And well, as for myself, I'm yet to see anything, but I can confirm now that I've definitely heard things. You see, a few weeks ago, I was repairing a sort of light fixture in a tunnel that we had under the buildings there. My co-worker was with me, but due to his size and me being the new guy, I had the pleasure of climbing the 10-foot ladder to work on the fixtures. While wrapping up the last fixture, I felt a strong tugging on the fabric of my pants by my right knee. I asked my co-worker not to do that, as I don't have a great balance and don't want to eat the concrete. He didn't answer me, though. I stepped down and turned around, and he was at the other end of the tunnel, maybe 70 feet from me, I would guess, kneeled down investigating a wire. Odd, but nothing extreme, right? Well, today, while I'm doing my routine, I heard a loud noise, sort of like tires screeching. I didn't think much of it. I mean, kids in their cars and all that, right? But it wasn't until a few minutes later that it dawned on me. I'm 40 feet below street level, under tons of metal and concrete. How on earth could I hear tires all the way down here? Well, a few minutes later, I was passing one of our entrances to the grillage, I think the roots of a skyscraper, and heard what I can only describe as a blood-curdling sharp scream come directly from the entrance. I concluded at that yep, I ain't messing with that today, and promptly just left off to the higher levels. So, what do you guys think about all of this? Any theories, questions? I'm really not sure what to make of it all, but in any case, it feels good to just share it with someone. I work as an EMT for an ambulance company. EMS has always been full of superstitions, and most of us believe in the supernatural on account of all the crazy, gruesome stuff that we get to see on any given shift. Every company, every EMT, every firefighter has a story about the station that is haunted or something that happened to them that can only be explained as paranormal. For the company that I work at, we have about 5 stations, each with their own stories. Only 1 or 2 truly scary stories, but mostly things like employees seeing shadows out of the corner of their eyes, getting uneasy feelings in the stations, or hearing an unexplained knock or voice, or being hissed or growled at, occasionally. And the station that I work at was no different. The station I work at is our main station, meaning that it is where we keep all of our extra resupply. So it is not uncommon for various crews to be going in and out of the station at all hours of the day. It was common knowledge, too, that the ambulance bay was pretty creepy at night. People report hearing noises, voices, footsteps, or ambulance doors opening and closing out in our garage. Now, I've worked at this station for 2 years, and I've definitely heard these things, but it's always been an easy to dismiss sort of thing. I mean, it's just my partner doing something out in the bay, or another crew doing some late night resupplies or something. The only experience that I've had there that I really couldn't explain was I heard distinctly growling noises in the garage late one night. At that time, I quickly realized that the only person in the bay was me, and I certainly didn't growl at myself, so I quickly left. That was all I ever experienced there, and for the most part felt very comfortable at that station. Well, that was until last night. So, the station is small and consists of a sort of living room with a kitchenette attached to a hallway. This hallway led to a garage on one side, the bathroom at the other, and at the end of the hallway is a door leading to the junior's bedroom, which you can then walk through to get to the senior's bedroom. If you go into the garage, there is a staircase that leads into the attack that stretches above the entire living quarters of the station. Me, Junior, and my partner, Senior, are dead asleep in our respective bedrooms. All the doors are closed, but when I'm woken to all these loud banging noises and the wall shaking. I realize that this banging isn't just banging though, but actually running. Something huge and heavy and fast is stomping and running around in the attack upstairs. It is stomping and running so loud that it is quite literally shaking the walls at this point. Whatever it was, it must have been absolutely huge to have been making sounds like this. But then, it gets faster. It is really fast and loud, and it is running across the entire length of the attack now. It's moving faster than anything can move. The stomping is happening one right after another, and it almost sounded like there were 10 people up there, or a creature with too many legs running right above our head. It's so quick that it's just weird. I'm sitting upright in my bed now, huddled in the corner of the bedroom, absolutely horrified. I get this sort of deep, visceral, primal feeling of dread all of a sudden, almost like what prey must feel like when they're being hunted. And suddenly, it's as if a thought from somewhere else is placed into my mind, and I just know with every fiber of my being that it knows that I'm awake and that I know that it's here. Like sick, twisted versions of that sort of Spider-Man spider sense theme. In between this stomping and the running, though, I can hear this sort of barking, whirling sound. It's hard to describe, but it's sort of like a grunt mixed with the sound of wind almost. It is making this sound as it's running, whatever it is, and I realize that it is moving so fast that I can hear the wind that it's creating sort of swooshing and whipping around it, and it's grunting as it's running. So now I very silently get up and I walk over to the senior bedroom door and try to open it, but it's locked. I feel as though I can't make a noise or it will come through into the station and kill me. I'm quietly knocking on the door, actually have some tears on my face now, pleading for my partner to let me in. I'm thinking that this is so loud that there's no way that she is asleep, but somehow she is. She is out cold and I don't get a response. In the end, too, I just decided that my partner had the right idea and I crept over to the junior bedroom door, separating my bedroom from the hallway that leads to the garage and the rest of the station, and I just locked the door. So I silently creep back over to my corner in the bed with my blankets and I begin to text her. It's 1:45 and I'm begging her to wake up over text and describing what I'm hearing. She's not answering though, so I text her fiancé and ask him to call her and wake her up, but he's not answering either. It's at this point that I decide to text my mum, and as I'm sitting there I get a really similar feeling to before, just an intense dread, a stark realization of pure truth. It doesn't even feel like my own thoughts, to be honest, more like a piece of truth was just somehow slipped to me by the universe. What I think is that the thing upstairs, it is not human. I'm explaining to my mum what I'm hearing, all these loud swishing wind sort of sounds and stomping and running, and then I hear it run downstairs. When I tell you that my heart stopped and my soul left my body, When I heard coming down the stairs, my stomach just completely dropped, and I was nauseous. I genuinely thought that I was about to die. I was waiting for it to start pounding on the door, and I had never been more thankful in my life because of the fact that I thought to lock that door earlier. I was waiting for screaming or the door to start shaking or something, but weirdly it just never came. It ran impossibly fast and hard back up the stairs, down the stairs, across the attack, down the attack, above my head in circles, down the stairs, up the stairs again and down again, and just kept doing this over and over and over again. So now I'm absolutely hysterical on the phone with my mum. No one ever prepared me for dealing with being haunted and taunted by a demon or whatever it was. My mum is trying to calm me down, and she asks me, "What do you want me to do?" To be honest, I didn't know. I don't know what she could have done. I don't know what to do. I just whisper, "I don't know what to do, just please don't hang up." She tells me to bang on my partner's door and wake her up, and so, at this point, I do. My partner wakes up and I hear rustling in her bedroom, and she goes, "Yeah," in a sort of dismissive voice, and slowly walks over to the door and opens it. I literally shoved her back in the room, whipped around faster than I ever moved in my life, closed the door and locked it. I explained to her everything that I was hearing, and we go and sit on the bed. The activity is dying down now, but it is still active enough for her to hear the running upstairs too. It's 2:45 at this point. Another crew that gets off at 3 got to our station to put their truck away and clock out to go home. Me and my partner, huddled together, glued to each other's hips, hurried outside together to meet with them out in the building parking lot. And it is at this point that we realize that a completely separate crew from around 11 p.m. that night had only left our truck full of medical equipment and drugs unlocked in our parking lot in the area known for being a not-so-great area, but also left our garage door open, giving literally just anybody access to our entire station. Me and my partner are absolutely terrified and are not willing to go back into the station at this point. The crew that's getting off at 3 goes into the station to clock out, and when they come back, they see us hanging out in the truck. They joke with us for a minute over the ghost and sort of make fun of us for sleeping in the truck for the rest of the shift. We ask them if they heard anything, to which the senior on that crew, who has been there for a long time and staunchly believes in the supernatural, says, "Yeah, it definitely sounds like there is someone walking up there, but he's harmless." Me and my partner are just like, "Harmless? That thing is not harmless." They leave and we decide to call for PD to make sure that it wasn't some crackhead that had gotten in while the garage door had been left open. PD got there, searched everywhere very thoroughly, and found no one and no evidence of anyone even being there. It's 4 o'clock now, and we notify our dispatch that station was cleared to be safe by PD, and together we venture back inside. We elected to keep the truck in the parking lot, so we would have to go back into the garage if we got a call or needed to make a quick escape from the demon or whatever it was. And together, we huddled together in the living room with all the lights on until we got off at 7. I heard a few minor bumps and bangs, but nothing crazy after that. Things that again could be dismissed as just house noises and whatnot. I barely slept though, and I am not looking forward to going back there later this week. In any case, eventually I do go back, and there is a little bit of an update to this. It's nowhere near as crazy as what happened last time I was here, but there was some activity during the shift today that I figured that you guys might like to hear. Most of the shift was perfectly fine. We were busy and out of the station most of the day, and a couple of times throughout the night too. While we were in the station though, there was some tension. The air was thick with our anxiety, and I'm sure that this is what caused what I'm about to share. For some context too, out in the bay there is this sort of cage. It's literally just a large metal cage that runs along the back of the garage and is where we keep all of our resupply. The door to the cage is supposed to always be locked. This is to prevent crews from going in and messing up with the company inventory. The only people with keys to the cage are the supervisors, who don't come in until around 7. So I was lying in bed. I was half awake, half asleep, just kind of staring at the ceiling, when I heard what sounded like the cage door being intensely rattled by something. It didn't sound like someone was trying to open the door. It sounded like someone grabbed a hold of the door and just started violently shaking it. This went on for about a minute. I went to my partner's bedroom to see if she'd heard it and found that she had slept right through it. We sat there for about 30 minutes listening for it, but there was nothing. It's 5:50 and I can hear distinct footsteps up in the attic now. Nothing crazy like the insane marathon running from the other day, but quiet footsteps up there. My partner says that she can't hear them, so in the end I just go back to my room. It's 6:30 now and I can still hear an occasional footstep up there, and to be clear, no one goes up there because it's creepy and there's really nothing up there at this point. It's just some boxes and supplies and an extremely dark attic space. Because I was the only one hearing the footsteps though, I decided to go out to the garage and investigate. When I get into the garage, the footsteps suddenly stop. There was no one in the garage, and when I went over to the cage to try and recreate the noise that I heard, I found that the door was open. Now, I'm not totally convinced that it wasn't just a person opening the cage door a bit aggressively. The only problem with this is that I have no idea who it would be because, as I said, there are only a few people who have a key to the cage and none of them are here, and they don't get here for another few hours. I went back inside and I could again hear the footsteps upstairs and now what sounded like in the garage too. I tried to record the footsteps, but they were too faint to pick up on the video. I also want to point out that the crew that we met outside the other day that was making fun of us for hanging out in the truck had made comments about how he likes to do resupply and to slam the cage door. Though I guess today that he just wanted to rattle the door or something. I'm not totally convinced that what happened today was a ghost and not just a person, but I'm also not totally convinced that it was a person and not a ghost. It is now 6:50 and I get off shift in about 10 minutes. I won't be back here for another 10 days and I would be lying if I said that I was sad about that. This story is from around maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I was a teenager, but I still remember it very clearly. For some context, this was a wooded area near my hometown in the UK that had established bike paths and people visited regularly, making it a decently known area, but it was still pretty large and had areas that no one would really go to. It all began when my friend and I cycled to the area to do some jumps and generally just sort of ride about, when we spotted a swing on the top of a hill and we decided that we wanted to go up to see it and use it. We did so and spent around maybe an hour or two just talking and swinging, and it began to get dark. My friend took off as he had to be back earlier than me, and instead of leaving, I sort of cycled around for a bit longer. I ended up cycling pretty deep into the woods until I was no longer on bike paths and instead barely visible sort of dirt paths. I went up another pretty steep hill, and this is when it happened. Below me, maybe around 20 meters or so near the bottom of the hill, stood a man wearing a black leather gas mask, some kind of military-looking jacket, and holding a really long sort of thick torch in his hand. The torch, it wasn't on, and he was just crouching down in my direction towards the hill, staring straight at the ground. And from what I could tell, he wasn't doing anything at all. But then he looked up at me. I couldn't make out if he was staring directly towards me, but the cold black voids of the mask's eye sockets really terrified me. I immediately nearly soiled myself and I leapt onto my bike. As I did, I heard a heavy and rough, fast breathing getting louder, and I rode as fast as I could for about 10 seconds before quickly looking back. He was stood still at the top of the hill, no longer chasing me, but just staring at me with the same cold black eyes. I never did tell anyone what happened, not even any of my friends, and still now, even driving past that place, it sends chills down my spine. I'm really glad that I had my bike with me that day because, to be quite honest, if I didn't, I think he probably would have caught me, and if he had, I shudder to think about what might have happened. I'm sitting in bed with a flashlight on at the moment, writing this at midnight because I'm just too scared to go back to bed. Let me preface this by saying that I live in a house that had been poorly abused before we moved in. I don't ever want to shame anyone, but they were really odd, possible addicts. There was freaky graffiti on the walls and a set of rules for the wife that was left unfinished, not to mention the holes, burns, and children's toys stuffed in the vents. We remodeled a lot of it though, but it'll never feel clean in this house again, I think. When we first moved in, I just felt the most overwhelming sense of dread standing in the room that was very obviously a child's bedroom at some point before. Seriously, just bad vibes. I don't think anyone has died in there though, but still. For the first few months, I was constantly waking up in the middle of the night, and one night, my glasses were thrown clear across the room at some point. Another night, every single figurine on my nightstand had been laid face down. I've woken up with bumps and bruises, but never anything too serious. Plus, it all happened at night while I was asleep, so I never put too much into it. My parents don't believe in spirituality, so there's no way that they would let me smudge the place or anything like that. They would always just tell me to get over it. But for the past few months or so, right as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear or feel something walking up to the side of my bed and trying to tug my blankets off of my bed. I sleep face down with my blankets pulled tightly over for this exact reason. And last night, it was the strongest one that I'd ever felt, and I knew that it was coming before it happened. My face got hot and I just couldn't breathe. But something clamped down on my shoulder and started messing with my pillow right in front of me. I was terrified, obviously, but I've gotten to the point where I'm not too afraid to reach over and turn my lamp on. In fact, it brings me a bit of comfort at least to have the light on like that. When I did, nothing was there and nothing has ever been there. I don't know if I'm hallucinating or if there's something wrong with me, but I want to clarify that I'm always 100% lucid in these moments. What I'm getting at is that it's not sleep paralysis or some weird sleep cycle stage or something. I don't know what it is, but has anyone else had this happen? And if you have, what did you do about it? I'm not a believer by any means, but I just had something really weird happen that I cannot explain. So I work from home. I was talking to my wife inside. I said, I'm going to go take a lunch break and mow the lawn. She said, okay, I'm going to go and take a shower. Fast forward 10 minutes, I'm mowing a patch of grass beneath our bedroom window, which is frosted over because it's in the shower looking out to the closed-off backyard. I hear 2 raps on the glass and look up. There's a hand in the window waving at me behind the frosted glass. I assume my wife is in there showering, so I knock back. The hand waves in response and I wave at it. Maybe 30 seconds later, she comes out from around the corner, clothed, because she was apparently at the mailbox. She's been messing around in the house and she goes to the mailbox before getting into the shower, these days anyway. But this is my master bathroom that only my wife and I use. One kid's away at a friend's and the other was across the house in her room. I don't believe in ghosts and stuff like that, but I just do not have an explanation for what I just saw. So I live in a little farming community in Virginia. Nothing out here but cotton and peanuts, and, well, apparently ghosts. I know that there was at least 2 in the store, but now apparently only 1. Number 1, he or she likes to knock things over, especially when we're talking about him or her. He or she also likes to appear as an orb in our security cameras from time to time. Number 2, the one that I'm fairly sure isn't there anymore, was a kind of, I don't know, it's hard to find the word, but maybe like a spirit stuck in a cycle, so to speak. In any case, it was a dude in a black hoodie. Now, I could easily say that it was just a trick of my eyes, were it not for the fact that I saw him over and over again, or occasionally mistook him for a customer sometimes, or one of the 2 men that I work with. The first time that I realized that I was seeing something was when I saw this man walk from the Coke window to the beer window. I thought that it was my coworker, James, fronting the cooler windows, only for James to come in from outside, as he had been walking the trash out to the dumpster. I got kind of a cold pit in my stomach when I realized that the person that I saw was technically not there. A few times I was shocked a customer had managed to get into the store without the doorbell ringing, saying hello as is required by the company, only to check the security cameras beside my register and realize that the floor was completely empty. So I began to be more cognizant of what I was seeing. The pattern sort of happens like this. The man starts at the sodas, walks to the single beer window, and disappears. I started talking to him because I'm mouthy, and I said, "You can't drink that beer anymore, man, you're dead." And look, I know, you can think that I'm crazy if you want, but my other coworker Sam has seen him too. I guess I saw him maybe about 15 to 20 times in total, but one day I saw him do something different. Instead of walking from the soda to the beer, he started at the beer window and started walking down the candy aisle toward the register, and then disappeared. After that, I never saw him again. So personally, I hope that this means that whoever this guy was has finally found his way out of the store. I know it's probably weird to hear someone speak like this, as if ghosts are real, but for us guys here at the station, it was honestly just common knowledge. Whatever the case, rest in peace, my dead beer-drinking friend. Back in 2020, I was living with my ex and we lived in a terrible apartment. But later that year, he achieved his dream of being a homeowner and we began the process of moving into the house. Well, one night, he came home from work and decided that he was done with the apartment and we should pack what we had left and just move into the new house. So, we packed up our pets and the rest of our stuff and moved in, and this is where it gets a little creepy. You see, it was probably about 9 p.m. or so, and my ex was inside the house setting up the internet, and I went out to the trunk of the car to get some stuff when I heard a woman screaming and calling a name at first that I thought that she lost her dog or something. But as she got closer, it sounded like a kid's name. Also, she was frantic, and then she said the words, "Come to mummy," and that's when it hit me that she had perhaps lost her kid. As she finally got into my view, I could see that she was a woman with blonde hair. She was carrying a lawn chair and she was crying and panicking at this point. I was making no attempt to conceal myself from the driveway and instead stared straight at her. I expected her to ask for help or something since her kid was lost apparently. And I mean, that's what I would do, but she didn't. She looked at me for a moment and kept walking down the street, still crying and calling his name. I ran inside and told my boyfriend what happened. Apparently, he could hear from all the way inside, and he called the police. The cops, they wasted no time in getting there, but still, she walked pretty quickly, and by the time that we saw the cop car, we didn't hear her anymore. I still don't know what happened after that, as it was a strange welcoming to our new home, and it never did happen again. I'm still not sure if she really was missing a kid, or I don't know, maybe she was just crazy or something. But her panic seemed so genuine. What really creeps me out, though, is how she didn't ask for help and just walked past me like I wasn't there. I mean, if you lost your kid, wouldn't you be asking someone to call the police at least? Something seemed really fishy about the whole situation. I do wish that I knew what happened. Hopefully she got her kid back, though, or at least got the help that she needed. This is about a kid that I went to school with. I'd known him since middle school, and he'd always been a bit weird, but when high school started, things just got worse. In middle school, he was just kind of cringe, I guess. Like stereotypical internet cringe sort of thing. You know what I mean? But by high school, he became genuinely horrifying. I have a lot of mini stories about him, but I'm going to be focusing on one for this. It's not that long, but bear with me. And for the sake of this, I'll call him Jay. This story took place in my freshman year. So every year at my school, before a new year starts, we have this back-to-school bash, which is just the kick-off football game with a chill little after-party on the cafeteria patio where we all dance and drink soda and stuff. Pretty standard school-organized party. My friends and I were having a pretty good time. We were sitting on a wall just drinking like Fanta or something, I think. I don't remember. But this kid, Jay, for whatever reason, thought that he was friends with me and my friends. I don't know why, but when I tell you that he trailed us at this party, I mean it. At one point, he came up to my group as well. We saw him coming and all exchanged sort of annoyed and simultaneous terrified glances. He came over to me and my best friend, looked at us, paused for a minute, and then asked us, "I'm trying to get girls to come with me into the woods. Do you have anyone you'd recommend?" My friend and I just sort of froze at this. We were too shocked by what he had said to even respond. I mean, who asks that, right? Who says things like that? And what were his plans? I guess we'll never really know, but he never got anyone, thank God. As my friends and I dedicated the rest of the night to telling all the adults what he had said, eventually I'm pretty sure that he got kicked out and had to have his mum pick him up. Again, thank God for that. Last I heard, he was still being very creepy and also drawing hate symbols on the walls of his new school. And that is a really ominous sign of something a lot worse that I really hope does not happen. So I'm 37 male, from Ireland, and my wife is 35 female, from Texas. I have an interest in horror movies and scary stories, I'll admit, but I've always been a skeptic in reality, I guess. My wife had told me about experiencing paranormal encounters in her family home, which I just shrugged off as I've slept in buildings and castles 1,000 years old and always experienced nothing. So how could she experience such things in a 50-year-old home in America? Excuse my arrogant Europeanisms. I was wrong. I assumed that she was just overly superstitious, as she is Hispanic, which, like the Irish, have a rich culture history of everything considered paranormal, ghosts, witches, demons, etc. But on the night in question, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, visiting my wife's family. I'm awake, laying on her bed, just staring through a doorway that leads to the living room area. It belongs to my wife. Her bedroom is like a sort of mini apartment. It's dark and around 4 a.m. when I see a sort of jet black cloud float along the floor in the living room. When I say black, I mean absolutely black, almost like a bad Photoshop on a photograph. So here I am looking at this cloud as it suddenly starts to stretch from its right side into a sort of triangle shape until it couldn't stretch anymore, it seemed, and snapped back into itself and evaporates, leaving a head staring at me from the floor. The head is also jet black and is only visible from the neck up on the floor. I couldn't see its face, but I will always remember seeing the window light shining through its long curly hair. Obviously, I am in disbelief at this. I wake my wife as I'm still making eye contact with the head on this floor. I must have seen it for 15 seconds straight. Before my wife looks up, I turn on the flashlight on my phone in the head's direction, and it just disappeared. After the event, my wife told me that she used to sleep with a blanket wall stacked on the bed covering the view of the doorway that I was looking through. She said that she used to do it because she was afraid that she would always see something. She's experienced noises and heard the voices of people talking, yet never seen anything. But when we told her family, her mother and auntie said that they have seen super fast glimpses of a black head looking around the doorway of the kitchen and the dining room. I wasn't aware of this beforehand, so my description of the black head really dropped some jaws at the dinner table. Amazingly, I was not frightened. I was just absolutely shocked, to be honest, and almost thrilled that I now fully believe in ghosts and even the afterlife. I still don't believe in organized religion, but at least now I believe in something, right? I can't find information online regarding black shape-shifting cloud entities, but the cloud itself was blacker than black, with a sort of sharp rotating edge, almost like it contained a cyclone or a black hole, but it was so dark that you really couldn't see any definition inside of it almost. And I guess I'm wondering if anyone has experienced something similar, or if you have any ideas as to what I saw that night. There was a time in my childhood where a lot of strange things happened to me. During that time, I used to have nightmares every night. Some of them were so disturbing that I woke up sweating and with my heart racing. One night when I was sleeping, I woke up because I felt a hand tickling me on my neck. The hand was cold and it tickled my neck very quickly and hard, so when I woke up, I still had the sensation in my neck skin. I thought that maybe it was just a dream, and so in the end I went back to sleep. But it didn't go away. The tickling started happening every night, and during the day sometimes I would ask my family if it was them pranking me, but none of them took me seriously, so it definitely wasn't them. A couple of days passed, and one night I realized that I had left my jacket at my neighbor's house, which was across a little park in front of my house. It was dark outside, but I didn't feel scared to go because it was like 5 minutes away, so I decided to go as quickly as I could. Everything was going all right until I started crossing the park, when suddenly I felt very uneasy. The place was extremely quiet and lonely, but I just felt like something dangerous was watching me. And that's when it happened. I heard what I can only describe as a deep, long moan come from between the bushes, something like a sound a zombie would make. I turned around and looked into the bushes, and I will never forget what I saw. It was a tall, completely red man. He looked like he was covered in almost like bright red blood. I started screaming and I ran to my neighbor's house. They let me in and gave me a glass of water to calm me down. My heart was about to come out through my throat, and I was shaking so hard that it took me a while to calm down and tell them what happened. After that, they took me home and I told my family about what had happened, and they just told me that I must have imagined it. I couldn't cross that park anymore from the fear that I felt from just looking at it. I had to cross it a few times after that happened, and I heard the noise again, just heard the noise this time. I never saw the man again, but no one ever seemed to hear it like I did, just me. One day, though, it just stopped happening all of a sudden, as well as the tickling and the nightmares. I still don't know if it was all just my imagination or not, but it was all pretty real to me at the time. That was clear. I'm mother lives in an apartment complex on the edge of the city, right where Parkersburg, West Virginia turns into Mineral Wells, West Virginia. The apartment complex is really on a dead end, but it's not quite near the dead end part. When I was living with her, I used to park my car on this concrete slab that was by the sign to the entrance, because I could pick up Wi-Fi from this person's house. I'm usually a bit of a night owl, so this must have been at around maybe 2 in the morning. I'd been sitting in my car for about an hour on my phone, and at this point, I just kept feeling like I was seeing something, like a shadow in my passenger side mirror, and I couldn't shake the feeling like I was being watched. I will say that I'd always got a weird vibe from the woods around here. Even walking down the road was frightening for me because I always felt this overwhelming anxiety. Sometimes it would be so bad that when I was walking, once I made it to by the sign to the entrance, I would always take off running until I just made it near the office to the apartment complex. But after I kept seeing a shadow from the mirror, I decided that I was going to turn my headlights on because since I was on my phone, my eyes weren't acclimated to the darkness. So once I put my phone down, I couldn't really see. I turned my headlights on though, and all I can say is that there was this tall thing standing near the edge of the woods, and it starts slowly backing up into the woods. At this point, I hurried up and I started my car and I took off like nobody's business. I drove to the gas station and I just sat there and realized that there must have been at least 2 of these things because I know that there was something around my car watching me. Whatever it was tall and I remember it looking grey. I can't really remember the face, and I mean, it was a fair distance away, so my view wasn't really great. But I was so scared once I saw it that I just took off as quickly as I could, and I really didn't have time to focus on the face. To this day, I don't ever walk down that road when it's dark, especially if I'm by myself. There's also been a couple of times when I would walk from my friend's house who lived a couple of miles from my mum's, and it was on this country road. There's a certain part of that walk where I just get this sensation that I need to walk a lot faster because something is in the woods around the area and it just doesn't want me near there. I really don't know how to explain it, but it's just this feeling like something was really angry that I was there and wanted me gone as quickly as possible. I don't know, maybe it is just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe there's some kind of ability that I have that I can't quite figure out yet. And well, if anyone has any suggestions to what I saw or have any suggestions about the feelings that I get near a certain area of the woods a few miles up from the road here, then do let me know because I'm just a bit stumped by all of this. This happened about 10 years ago. I must have been 27 and I'm female. So my partner at the time was in a band and we stayed in this converted garage. Not really converted, I guess. It was still very much like a garage. Concrete walls, damp, but we made do. It was in a service lane. It's sort of like a street that has a business down in it and the back of the houses and whatnot. We had come home very early that morning and gone to bed. His bandmate was living in a bus at the time, which was parked out the front as they stored the gear next to our flat in another garage. I woke up at around 5 a.m. hearing screams, mainly from a woman, but also very aggressive shouting from a man, "I'm going to kill you," and so on. The area that we were in is not the nicest by any means, although now the area is very hot property. It's not far from the beach, boutique shops, etc. But this was coming from a house that I had thought was condemned. 2 stories, dilapidated, torn curtains, rotten wood, about 5 broken down cars out the front that had been picked apart, and it turns out that someone was living in there. I woke up and went straight to the front door and saw a man stomping around a parked car on the side of the road, chasing a lady in her pajamas around it, threatening to kill her. She was screaming and crying, and out of instinct, I screamed out something like, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm calling the cops." They both stopped and looked at me, in my pajamas, standing near my door barefoot. The man, he had a full leather jacket, pants and boots, half a face tattoo, and even though he was across the street, I could see the whites of his eyes. He was obviously on something, and absolutely furious. He shouted at me, "I'm going to kill you," and motioned cutting of the throat with his thumb. When he turned to me, the woman escaped to the abandoned-looking house and locked the door. I, being brave and stupid, replied, "Come on then," and grabbed a large plank of 2x4. I kept it behind the door there as I found this area rather sketchy and would be home alone a lot on the weekends. I've never used it, but I felt better having it there. And walked outside in my pajamas and leopard print robe with the wood over my shoulder on the phone to the police. Now, I'm not the smallest woman in the world. I must have been around 80 kilos at that point, 5'10", but he would have taken me out if he wanted. But I think the idea of the police made him second guess. He got the hint and he took off down the road. My partner nor the other bandmate in the bus got up at any point. I must admit that I was pretty angry at both of them. I seemed to be the only one who had the kahunas to do anything about it. Another lady across the road came out also, and we talked about our menfolk not doing anything about it. Her husband stayed in bed too. And anyway, later on that week, a lady came to my house thanking me for helping her niece, that he was some crazy cracked-out guy that had fallen in love with her and wouldn't take no for an answer, apparently. He had apparently come to her house without invitation, expecting that she would welcome him, drunk and cracked out of his mind, with open arms, only to be rejected, which is allegedly what threw him into a rage, to which he proceeded to kick and beat her and chase her around the street. Later on, maybe about a week later, I was told that he was arrested and taken away on my street. He was led away by police, handcuffed with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and I was glad to hear it, as I was terrified that he was going to come back when I was alone. So in 2019, my brother, my best friend, and I were riding our bicycles across the United States to raise money for a cancer charity. Because we were doing this, it meant that we were camping every single night, most often in town parks or campgrounds if they have them. This particular night, in the middle of the trip, we arrived in Napoleon, North Dakota, literally the definition of the middle of nowhere. The evening was entirely normal, until just after the sun went down. As I was laying in my sleeping bag under a pavilion in this town's only park, I could hear the faint noise of radio static, almost like someone was flipping through channels or something, picking up bits and pieces of songs and commercials on the radio. The sound grew louder and louder until it was undeniable, and all that my brother and I could hear. Because we had just finished biking 70 miles that day and had 60 more tomorrow, I was pretty angry and wanted my sleep, so I left the pavilion to go yell at some loud other camper. And as soon as I got up, I noticed two things. One, I looked at my phone for the time and I noticed that it was around 1:30 in the morning now, which just wasn't possible because I don't even recall falling asleep, and it felt like I literally just got back from dinner at around 8:30. And two, the campsite downtown was totally and completely empty. In fact, the town was dead. By this time, I got a little bit weirded out but decided to continue investigating. I continued following the static, and it led me to multiple places around Napoleon. First, it took me to the water tower, then the main street, and finally it was leading me out into this large cornfield on the edge of town. I then realized that this sound was almost shifting in the wind, coming from different places just moments after it came from one direction. I decided not to follow it into the field because, to heck with that, right? And went back to my sleeping bag to get some sleep. But the most concerning part happened just then. You see, I put in my earbuds to block out the static, and just then the volume of said static only increased. The noise seemed to be coming from inside of my head. I know that sounds really weird to say, but that is honestly the best way to explain it. So, after a restless night, I woke up to a day of cycling 60 miles in a downpour, but my head, thankfully, was finally silent. I asked my brother if he heard the same thing, and he said that he did, but he just assumed that it was another camper. But again, the site, and quite literally the entire town, was entirely empty. This is unrelated too, but that morning I received news that my childhood dog died, launching me into my first ever experience with grief. Probably unrelated, but it was a weird coincidence. So I was 16 when this happened. I was also working at the place where dreams go to die, Walmart. I obviously hated working there, but thankfully this encounter was the straw that broke the camel's back. Another thing that I should mention too is that I look a few years younger than I actually am. I have a bit of a baby face, so even though I was 16, I looked about 13. It was during the day when the incident happened. It was a pretty slow day, and I'd spent most of my shift wandering around, helping where I could. I was already done with everything in my department. I was in the middle of heading back to my area when a man approached me. He was a bit of a creepy dude, but I didn't want to be rude by not helping him, even though everything in me was telling me to walk away. But creepy guy was asking me to help him find a gift for his niece or something, so I asked him if he had any idea what he wanted to get his niece, and he said that he wasn't sure, so I took him to the kids section so that he could choose something. While he was browsing, he started asking for my name, if I lived in the city, how old I was, that sort of thing. I obviously wasn't overly keen on providing this information, so I was pretty vague when answering. Other times I'd completely avoid the question altogether and try to redirect the conversation to his niece. It was evident, though, that he wasn't interested in discussing his niece, so he provided one-worded answers and went right back to his intrusive questioning. He started asking me more personal stuff too, like if I had a boyfriend, if I'd ever had sex before. Now, I was horrible at communicating when someone crossed a boundary. I hated confrontation, and my managers sucked really badly. They'd give me all sorts of trouble for the stupidest things, which made me really anxious whenever I had to talk with them. As a result, I did everything I possibly could to avoid talking with them. Anyway, I asked if there was anything else that he needed. I just wanted to hurry and end this whole interaction. But of course, he told me that he needed a card and a bag to put the gift in. So I begrudgingly directed him to the card section. All the while, he upped the creep factor and began asking me extremely personal questions. He was now giving me compliments too. He'd tell me how beautiful I was, how I had such a great-looking butt. Keep in mind, I don't look a day over 13, and he knew my age too, and yet that didn't seem to stop the creep from making these crude remarks. While he picked out a bag and a card, I kept my distance, but I remember he kept giving me, the best that I can equate it to is bedroom eyes. It made me sick to my stomach, but I figured that he'd eventually get everything that he needed, and he'd be on his merry way. He eventually got a card and a bag, and he asked me to lead him to the till, since he didn't know where they were. Obviously he did, but I just sucked it up and directed him to the checkouts. When we got within walking distance of a till, I politely excused myself and felt relieved to finally get rid of him. Unfortunately, though, he ran ahead of me and asked for my number, even going as far as making this horrible comment. It was, "I like my girls nice and young. They can just keep going and going. You and I will have lots of fun." That made my skin absolutely crawl. I told him that I didn't have a phone. I did, of course, and it was sitting in my vest pocket, but he thankfully didn't seem to notice it. I was beyond paranoid, though, that he'd spot the phone and call me out on my lies. Despite being repeatedly told that I, in fact, did not have a phone, he kept insisting that I give him my number or a social media where he could contact me. It got to the point where I was backing away from him because he'd gotten so close to me. I could even smell his breath. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take the hint and kept inching towards me. I want to know the real punch to the gut, though? I had a couple of managers walk past, and they definitely saw this guy harassing an underage employee, and they did nothing to help. I was getting desperate. No one was coming to my aid, which made me feel hopeless on top of it. I thought that I'd never get rid of this guy, but my saving grace was my manager walking through the front door before the creep got handsy with me. My manager was my absolute favorite person. He was pretty intimidating, used to serve in the military. He was a pretty big guy as well, pure muscle. Could probably break me in two with one hand if he wanted to, but he was a total gentle giant. Whenever customers got rowdy with the employees, he'd always intervene. It was always hilarious too to see people who were red in the face deflate the moment that they saw him approaching. I spotted my manager though and gave him a look of desperation when he glanced over at me, and I cannot tell you how relieved I felt when I saw him make a beeline for us. He placed himself between me and the creepy dude, slapped on his customer service smile, and asked if he could assist the creep, since I was supposed to be on my break. I happily took the hint and practically ran to the back of the store. I went to the staff room and was shaking from the adrenaline and on the verge of crying. I was in the staff room for about 20 minutes before my manager called me into the office. He asked if I was okay, and I said that I was shaken up but fine. He assured me that he'd have me working in the back for the next week, just to ensure that if the creep came back looking for me, he wouldn't be able to find me. He then told me that the guy kept asking where I went and what my number was, what my name was, but my manager told him that he couldn't release that information. My manager literally escorted the guy out of the store and watched him drive away before coming back to talk with me. Thankfully, I never did see the guy again. Then again, I left my previous job shortly after this encounter. I got another offer to work with my best friend at her dad's restaurant after I told her what happened, which I happily took. I admit that I was a little sad to leave, mainly because I really did adore my manager, but my hatred for Walmart and my fear of that dude was ultimately what pushed me to leave. So my parents got divorced when I was 12, and my mum moved us into a small town in the Pennsylvania mountains. After a few months of living there, I went back to live with my dad in Texas. Ever since then, though, I've heard these voices of people that I know calling me into the woods. It's been almost 8 years now, and it's only when I'm alone, but not every time, too, that I'm alone. And it seems to only happen here in Texas. It's weird, but I never even considered that it was maybe something to be concerned about, until recently, I guess. It was just something that happened. I even followed the voice once, and only thought that it was kind of weird that I had heard my dad screaming for me if he didn't actually call me, because I got home later and asked him about it. I don't know if this is related to or not, but remembering that it was what sparked this post, a few years ago, I was about a mile out into the woods in Pennsylvania when I zoned out for a minute. When I zoned in, I heard a stick snap, and I looked over to see a white-tailed doe staring at me from about maybe 10 feet away, and it sort of looked almost as if it had been trying to sneak closer to me when I looked at it. I just sort of backed away from it and went down the mountain, but as I was backing away, it looked at me with a sentience that, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I'm not entirely sure what to make of any of this now, but I am looking back on all the times that I just sort of brushed it off as normal and now rethinking things. But what do you guys think? Should I follow the voices? So I was homeless for a couple of years and parked to sleep at a campsite up north of where I am. I pulled in, parked, fed the cats, and started to cook and relax. When all of a sudden, flashlights appeared on my face. 4 of them, looking in my windows, so I assumed it was rangers asking me to move since the campsite was technically closed. I rolled down my window a bit and asked what was up, and apparently it was a family of 4, also parked and camping. They had a fire going and a dog, so I figured things were okay here, but there was a really weird feeling about it. My boyfriend at the time decided to try and befriend them, and we got out to chat, and they asked a lot of very pointed personal questions. Are you married? Do you live around here? Do you have any kids? But actually it was their 2 kids asking all the questions. They spoke like adults too, which made me assume maybe trauma was a real part of their life or something. At some point though, the kids put themselves to bed by basically going, "Mom, Dad, we're headed to bed." That seemed a bit weird to me, but whatever. But it got way worse from here though. They talked about their converted truck that they lived in. Apparently the kids shared a bed, and a key point that they made was the van was soundproof. They really wanted to play with our cats, but no such luck. The husband and wife, I only remember the dude said his name was Scooter, which, really? Scooter of all names? Also, the daughter's name was Olivia, and the son's Skeeter. I know, it sounds fake, right? But they started to try and separate me and my boyfriend, saying stuff like, "Let's walk to the river, let's go look at the car," and things like this. They were really interested in hearing about any injuries that we had too. And at some point, they started letting the fire go out and even started sort of standing behind us a lot. That was enough for me. We left some stuff behind and we got into the car, started it up and just talked like, what the heck was that? It took 2 minutes for the woman to walk up to the van and ask if we were leaving. We said no, obviously, and that we were just cold. She asked to sit in behind us, and I asked why. She didn't answer and asked if she could sit with us or on my lap, and again, that was really weird, and I asked why. She didn't answer again. She said that we can't leave her there because her husband beats her, and so I asked if she wanted the police, and she didn't answer, pulled out a cigarette and lit up, leaning against the door of our car, and we just sort of looked at each other, and it was then that I heard someone douse the fire. It was then that I said, "Baby," just out of so much nervousness, which is when I found out my boyfriend was suspicious from the beginning and didn't think to say anything until now, only to add that if I had stayed and not followed him to the car, he would have just left me there. He was a waste of space, but before I could process it, I heard the husband grab something off the fire tool set. One thing that I noticed in there was a large red axe, and I just got tunnel vision and I hit the gas at that. I felt this woman pounce off the side of my van as we pulled away, and just as we got on the road, an ambulance was behind us with its lights flashing. I wasn't about to stop for it. You know how easy it is to buy emergency lights for any car on Amazon, right? No thanks. But the ambulance turned off to a dead-end road, eventually after a while of demon driving into town, that is. We never heard a siren, looked it up, and the aforementioned river was 2.5 miles into the dense woods, so pretty isolated. Apparently a lot of people go missing out there too, and I often wonder if, perhaps, these guys are to blame. So my whole life, I think that I've known that my house is haunted by something, but it's always just been pretty mild stuff. But this past year, things have escalated a lot, and it's starting to get concerning. I have no clue what this thing is or how to get rid of it, to be honest, so I'm going to give you guys a lot of things that it can do, and hopefully one of you will know how to get rid of it. For context, we built my house on a lot that previously had a crack house on it, and we moved in when I was 5. Also important to know is that my room is at the end of a carpeted hallway, with my parents' room directly across from it. Now, probably a year or so after we moved in, I started hearing footsteps on the carpet leading up the hallway to my room. When they got to the door, they would stop and restart at the end of the hall. There was extremely squeaky hard wood right before the carpet, so I would have heard it if it was my parents or siblings. My siblings? They slept in the basement and would have had to have crossed the hardwood to get to the hallway. When I was probably around 7, I also saw a pale face outside of my bedroom window that ducked out of view when I saw it. I've always constantly felt watched too, and I feel like if I don't watch my back, something's about to get me. I'm 19 now and still can't shake that feeling, but I find my belongings in my room in different spots when I left them, and some fairly large things have entirely disappeared. This doesn't happen to me outside of that room, though, which is weird, but things have fallen off of my wall, fallen over, etc. on their own, and on occasion, also a loud clap noise precedes stuff moving. I've seen it twice, but both times as a sort of shadow figure, one time sprinting directly at me in my backyard, disappearing about 4 feet from me, and another time crossing my house into the hallway my room is in. The second time too, my dog was looking up at it and following it into the hallway even. One time, it turned on our vacuum that was in a closet and not plugged in. It took me about 3 minutes to figure out where it was coming from, and when I opened the door to the closet, it immediately turned off. About 20 minutes later, it turned on again, this time only lasting about 30 seconds. But the weird thing is that there aren't any outlets in that closet at all, and I've tried to turn it on without plugging it in, just in case that was a feature that I didn't know about, but it obviously didn't work. This one also may not be as compelling, I know, but TikTok and Snapchat filters they rely on detecting a face will often detect one in the hallway, or one time going into my room even. I was sleeping in my parents' room recently too, and they were out of town and they have a nicer bed, and I heard rapid footsteps that walked right up next to me faster than I could react to open my eyes, and when I did, nothing was there. This one is strange too because it's the first time that I've heard the footsteps since I was like 11, and I haven't heard them since. One time I also fell asleep on the phone with someone, and in the morning she told me that she heard a little girl whispering in the microphone while I was asleep. She said that when she asked if the whispering was me, she heard a woman screaming into the mic, and at which point she just hung up. I'm also not sure if this one is related, but my older sister, 25 years old, said that she saw the Hat Man in our last house. She was 10 and 11 years old when we lived there, and my dog sometimes would growl and bark at something that no one could see, and I don't know if that's enough information about it, but I'd very much like to know if anybody can tell me what this is and what the heck I should do about it. Because, like I said, it's escalated dramatically in the last year, and it's starting to scare me. So this happened probably around 14 years ago when I was 17. I was in university in California. I graduated high school early, so started at university early as well. And I used to go to a local Starbucks by my campus in my free time to study, because it was hard for me to focus at home. I remember this older guy used to come in a lot too and just sit alone at a table, always facing me with one small coffee, and he would always just stare at me. It made me really uncomfortable, but I was too young to think about reporting it because I didn't think there was anything to report, to be honest. I mean, he was just staring, not approaching me or anything. In fact, I thought some of it was just in my head, to be honest. But I began to notice that sometimes he would leave around the same time that I did. With this Starbucks, the parking was mostly on the level ground of a free parking structure that was around the corner from the shop, and it was usually super easy to get a spot right in front, so you could actually see your car from the street in the structure. I usually parked there, and I never felt particularly unsafe except when I would realize that he was following me out. I began to note what his car looked like and where he would park. It would usually be a little ways away from me, and I would wait for him to leave before I went anywhere because I didn't want him to follow me or anything. One afternoon, though, I was heading to my car and I noticed that he had parked right next to me. The passenger side of the car was by my driver's side, and it was very close. I didn't see him, but I remember just having the most awful feeling in the pit of my stomach when I realized that he had parked so close. I rushed to get into my car, and it was at that moment that I shut the door that I realized that he was following me and approaching the driver's side of my vehicle. He had gotten as far as the door when I quickly locked it, and thankfully I did it fast enough because he tried to open my door a second later. No words, mind you, no trying to get my attention or anything. He literally just yanked on the door handle as aggressively as he could. I immediately backed out of the spot and floored it out of the structure. I got caught at a red light outside the structure though, which gave this guy enough time to catch up to me in his car. I honestly don't know why I didn't call the cops at this point, but I remember trying to rationalize what was going on in my head and thinking that maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing, even though the man had literally just tried to open my car door aggressively like that. I know it's stupid, but I was 17. If it were me now at 31, you bet your bottom dollar I would have driven straight to the nearest police station. Thankfully, though, I was aware enough that I needed to lose him before I went home, so I turned into a series of residential streets to see if he would follow me. He did. I just sped up and made a bunch of random turns until I was sure that I had lost him. Then, finally, I drove home and never went back to that Starbucks ever again. This happened a few months back. I, a 37-year-old male, currently moved back in with my senior parents. My parents have lived in the same neighborhood for almost 35 years now. It's quite nice and upscale, and the houses don't go up for sale often, so I've known all the neighbors for years. Recently, though, the house directly next door was sold from grandmother to grandson, so since it's been vacant a little while, the cleanup began this summer, and skip to the end of summer, my mother and I are outside on the porch smoking, and the grandmother next door had just up and started doing some landscaping in the front yard alone. We exchanged hellos, and she went digging in the flowers, I think. About 10 minutes later, though, a disheveled-looking, tall, skinny lady starts strolling through the neighborhood with luggage and a backpack. Now, this might be normal where you live, but it was not in this neighborhood. We are not really on the beaten path anywhere. Like, you would need a reason to go into my area. It's not a shortcut anywhere or anything like that. And anyway, immediately everybody was uneasy. Her actions and behavior just made my gut scream crazy or high as a kite on hard drugs or something. She passed our porch and goes straight to the edge of the neighbor's yard and starts talking loudly. I keyed up, starting to ready myself. Then she approached closer to my neighbor, continued talking, then backed up to the edge of the yard. She continues talking loudly and then repeats the same behavior, only this time she gets closer. Then back to the street a third time, even closer again. I'm a pretty big guy and am heavily tattooed, so I'm fairly intimidating looking. And I know it, although I'm a big teddy bear to be honest, but I get up and walk to the end of the porch for a better look, and this crazy chick goes in for a fourth time and got right next to my neighbor at this point, and she looked scared, like my neighbor looked really scared. So I got up and yelled at the lady after taking off my shirt, and I was just like, "Hey, can I help you? Do you need something? If not, you should keep moving." No lie, I think she totally didn't realize that other people are outside in close proximity, but at that, she absolutely took off. She quickly vanished, and it was obvious that she was up to something. Thankfully, we haven't seen her since then, or anything like it again. So I, a 23-year-old female, have been living at my house since I was born. 7 years back, we constructed a new outhouse with minimal furniture, which is probably about 20 meters away from the main home. Since construction, I've used the outhouse more than any of my other family members to study and attend online lectures to avoid getting distracted. But ever since 2021, I've witnessed subtle oddities, I guess you could say, during my time there. For instance, on January of 2021, the wall clock suddenly stopped at around 4:20. My mum and I changed the batteries and it started working, so no big deal. But the next day it stopped at about 4 again. So I bought a new clock with new batteries and hung it on the wall. It worked well for a couple of days, but it stopped working again. Frustrated, we bought one more clock, inserted new batteries, worked for a couple of days again, and it stopped again at 4:10. All three stopped clocks are still in this house, and we gave up, and since 2021 there have been no working clocks in the house. It almost feels like, I don't know, time doesn't exist when I enter this house to do my tasks. Whereas the clocks in the main house work as usual. There's no issues here at all. Although we found it strange, my family didn't think much about the incident and went ahead with our life. I mean, it's just a few clocks after all. I did do some Googling to find the spiritual meaning behind stopping clocks though, especially around 4, after what I'm about to tell you, but nothing turned out. So anyway, I moved away from my house to pursue higher studies in a different city. I didn't experience any weird things there, and returned on August of 2022. I started using the outhouse again for studying and preparing for my exams. As I finished my task for the day, I went ahead to turn off the lights, and suddenly I felt a slight tap on my upper arm. I completely lost my balance and hit myself against the wall. But again, I thought to myself, it must have just been me being clumsy or drowsy or something, and went back to the main house to sleep. But the incident that happened 2 days ago drove me to share this with you guys. So I finished studying at around 8 p.m. at night, like I usually do. I turned off the lights, and just before I stepped outside the door to lock it, I felt someone or something whisper in my ear. Although I didn't see anything visually, it sounded sort of like gibberish, and whatever it was, it whooshed past me. I even felt a waft across my face like air was being moved, and at that, I rushed outside, locked the door, and I went back to my main house to sleep. I didn't discuss the incident with my family members because I would definitely get laughed at, said that it was all in my head. But I don't understand what I've been experiencing here. Is this what a haunting is? Should I be more aware of spiritual stuff like this, or am I just overthinking it all? What do you guys think? So this was very recent, 6 days ago to be exact. For some context too, I've struggled with seeing and hearing things that are not real since I was a kid, and have had help over the years for it. Now, I'm a huge fan of hiking, or just simply taking walks in the woods. The only time that I go alone is when I'm in the woods that I live near. This day, though, I wasn't. I was with my friend Lars in a walk about 3 hours from my house. We were planning on traveling around and staying at motels in the meantime, and that day we decided to take a walk in a popular area for people who like to walk in the woods like me. The catch was that these woods were huge, which wasn't really a problem for us though, because we liked it. In fact, we were thrilled. There wasn't really much to it though. I mean, it was pretty, we escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. There really wasn't much to it in the end though. I mean, it was pretty, we escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. We walked for a while until we got to this spot, not too different from the rest, except for one thing. Nobody else was around in this section all of a sudden. That's why me and Lars took this turn. The other turn had a few people there, and after a while of walking down this path, we spotted a man. A naked man. We gave each other a look and sort of turned around. The man was slightly off the path, bent over and looking at something. As me and Lars were walking back, talking about the strange man, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see the man. He was talking to us about the bug that he picked up. I got a good look at him at this point. He was pretty tall, nothing crazy, but bald with a few brown hairs beginning to grow, but like I said, completely naked. I flashed the man a brief smile and I sped up, so as not to disturb him, I guess. We got out of that place as fast as we could, and once we got to the car, we just kind of laughed it off. I mean, yes, it was creepy, but more weirdly funny, I guess you could say. The car ride was nothing, so skip to the motel. As we're checking in at the motel, we see the same man walk in. He was a little harder to recognize, considering the fact that he now had clothes on and all that, just torn up clothes. But he waited behind us in line. Good thing we were almost done too, checking in, because as soon as we did, we went right to our room and locked it without a second thought. This was definitely creepy. I mean, was he following us, or was it just a coincidence? We both decided that we weren't going to stay at this hotel for more than a night. Heck, I wouldn't have stayed even one night if Lars weren't there telling me that it was okay. That night, though, Lars wanted to go outside for a cigarette at one point. I don't smoke, but no way was I going to stay in this room alone. I followed him outside, and we chatted for a bit. After a few minutes, I see the guy walk out of the door. Lars put out his cigarette and began to walk inside, but before we got in, the guy pulled out what was probably a knife or something else sharp. It was dark, so I couldn't really see, but it was something sharp, and started carving through his sleeve and right at his arm. I saw liquid, or what I thought was liquid, trickling to the ground and immediately knew that this was probably blood. I rushed into the lobby and Lars got the idea and followed, and we alerted the staff, but by the time that they got someone to come out, he was gone. To this day, I still have so many questions about that time. Did he follow us? Why the heck was he naked? Why was he doing that to himself in the first place? I guess I'll probably never really know the answers, but honestly, I'm still spooked by all of this. I don't know what I'll do if I ever see him again, but man, I sure do hope that never happens. So nearly a year ago, on Christmas, I was at my dad's with some of my siblings. We celebrated Christmas, and then after dinner, my dad headed off to be with his girlfriend at her apartment. Left in the house were my 16-year-old uncle, my 16-year-old brother, me who was 15, and the youngest who was a toddler. I woke up early in the next morning, and it was the day after Christmas. I sat on the floor beside an outlet on my tablet. Everybody else was still sleeping, and then I heard a banging on the back door. I thought it was my dad coming back, but the banging got louder and went on for too long. For lack of a better term, I think I disassociated, didn't know really what to do, and couldn't move until I heard the back door break all of a sudden. I had been paranoid about home invasions due to our area in the city before, but I had no idea what to do and just sort of stood there in shock. I put down my tablet and picked up a nearby flashlight. I think to throw at whoever broke in, I guess, but when the back door had given out, I heard him go quickly through the downstairs, stomp up the stairs, and then he was right outside of the door of the room that I was in. The man opened the door, turned left, and then turned right, where he saw me sitting on the floor, beside the outlet, less than 3 feet away from him. He was taller than my dad, and wore completely black and a ski mask as well. He held a big rusty-ish crowbar that had a blue handle. He was wide and looked on the older side. I took a small breath and screamed louder than I ever have, and I held it for at least 20 seconds. Once I screamed, he screamed a bit too, and then ran downstairs and out of the house. I went to the top of the staircase, after he was already down them obviously, and out the hallway, and I yelled, "Please leave," as loud as I could. Looking back on this, asking a house invader to leave is pretty useless, I know, because he already was leaving, and also because, he broke in, right? But I just wasn't thinking straight. My screaming, though, woke up my uncle and my older brother. I wasn't wearing pants, so I put on pants quicker than I ever had, while telling my older brother what had just happened as he was half awake and confused. I ran downstairs, and my uncle had just come from his room in the basement. I quickly told him someone had broken in and left after I screamed. He already had a knife and told me to grab one too. I did, and after making sure the robber had left the house and checking quickly on the toddler who was somehow still sleeping, we relaxed a bit. My uncle told me to guard the back door and stab anyone who comes through while he checked the area outside the neighborhood to see if the robber was gone or where he went. I held the knife and stood beside the broken back door, knowing that if someone came back, I couldn't really do anything, as I'd never really fought before, and, really I was just a kid holding a kitchen knife. So I just held the knife in hopes that they wouldn't come back, and thankfully they didn't. My uncle came back and said that they must have had a driver, since there was no way that he could get away that fast on foot. None of us had phones, so my older brother called my dad over Instagram on a tablet to tell him what happened. We explained what happened, and when Dad was 10 minutes away via car, he hung up. While we all sat and waited for my dad, we talked and realized that this was likely all planned. The invader came when there was no car in the driveway, and after entering, he ran directly upstairs, ignoring the new Christmas presents, an alcohol collection, and even 2 gaming consoles smack dab in the middle of the living room that he had just run through. He went directly for my dad's room where me and my older brother were. My dad collects valuable shoes and has some expensive watches that he keeps in his closet, and only someone friends with my dad who had been in the house before could have known that. In any case, when my dad came back, he asked me over and over about how the intruder looked, and I just told him again and again while he and my uncle tried to think of which friend it could have been. I was the only one who saw the guy and had been less than 3 feet away from me. I was in direct physical danger from some stranger that I think that I'd never met. We didn't actually call the cops in the end, as the police in our area and city are known for being more than unhelpful. But as Christmas was getting closer again, I was worried about being back there around the same time the person broke in. I've had a harder time sleeping, and I've been more and more paranoid. I understand I was and am very lucky that I wasn't hurt, and all we got was a broken back door in the end, but I still honestly hate the person who broke in. And I sure hope that whoever he is, that he gets caught soon. So I live in northeast New Mexico, and we're known to be a Skinwalker hotspot. But I've always heard the stories and just joked about it, really. But lately, I just don't know anymore. You see, I've been hearing sounds of like howling, heavy breathing, and yipping out of my window. But when I look, there's never anything there. This has been going on for several months now, and it was never any bother to me until recently, I guess. You see, a couple of days ago, I heard the sounds inside of my house, along with footsteps. I immediately thought that it was an intruder, obviously, so I grabbed my cig and started making a sweep of the house. I checked every room, but I didn't find anything. My house is single story, and there's a small crawl space above the ceiling, but the only way to get into it is an attic door that I keep locked at all times. It could have been a small animal, I think, but it sounded like it was at least 150 pounds. Animals near my house have different behavior than in Texas, the only other state that I've lived in too, so obviously it's a different environment and all that, but I used to see animals standing still in front of my Ring doorbell, just looking at it for like several minutes. It's been about 2 months since this last happened, but when it did happen, it was around twice a month, I would guess. In other instances, I've had squirrels climb on the sills and look through my windows. This happens near weekly, and just the other day I saw a hummingbird just sort of chilling in front of my window for about 30 seconds. I do have 2 dogs, Snoop and Riley. I started to keep them inside because they would start barking at random stuff in the dark, and it would spook the cows and wake us up. But I was hanging out with a friend, and we were on a walk after sitting for several hours watching TV. It's fairly dark outside, probably about 9 or 10 p.m. I would guess. And he wanted to see my deer blind as we're both into hunting. We walked out there and talked for a bit before starting our walk back. But about a third of the trip back, we started hearing my dogs barking, owls hooting, and the horses acting weird. It all started at the same time as well and ended at the same time. A little while later, there was what I can only describe as rustling in the grass about 40 feet in front of us. Both me and my buddy noticed it. It looked pretty large, about the size of a bear, and only the back of it was exposed, but it was dark, and the weirdest thing is that it was almost hairless. I started to back away slowly, and it stopped moving for a second before just scurrying off into the woods. It didn't have a tail, whatever it was, and obviously I didn't get a real good look at its head, but its body was, I don't know, kind of like a dog's, I would guess. In any case, we made it back to the house and talked for a bit before he started his drive home. But what do you guys think? Is this a Skinwalker, or is this some other animal that I'm just not aware of? If so, what can I do to get rid of this thing? It's not good for the livestock for sure, and it's scaring them a lot. And to be frank, it scares me a lot too. As a student in the late 90s, I was asked to take part in the last UK university's pistol shooting competition at Bisley Camp, home of Britain's largest competitive shooting complex. I wasn't keen on it, as the Dunblane massacre had put a grim slant on things and pistols were about to be permanently banned too. But with peer pressure, I agreed to go along. A minibus would take the team up. We'd have the competition, come home and go to the pub for a laugh. The night before the competition, I had a crystal clear dream of a white Ford Capri and a horrible accident. A row of 4 orange-leafed trees, a broken axle, a Scottish woman with a small black dog asking if I was all right. I woke up that morning to be told that our minibus booking had fallen through and some guy called Luke would drive the 4 of us. I didn't know the guy, had never met him, never heard of him in fact, knew nothing about him or his car and had never been to Bisley. Luke was just a friend of a team member doing us a favor, yet he was wearing the red jacket, black jeans and blue baseball cap of the person that I'd seen in my dream. When he turned up at our halls of residence in a white 2-door Ford Capri, both I and the friend that I'd told about the dream essentially went pale and refused to get into the car. "Guys, you're being ridiculous. I had it serviced last month. It's old, but it's fine." Nah, man. The front axle of that car is... "What? The axle's fine." Ticked off because we were late, he gets in and throws the car up and down the driveway, jamming on the brakes, and then shouts, "See? Get in, we're late." The day goes fine, competition ends, all in high spirits. Get in the car and idiot Luke decides to speed up the main road out of the camp. Just as I yell stop, I'm getting out. There's an almighty pop, followed by screeching as the car veers left into a row of 4 orange-leafed trees and comes to a halt. Lots of panicked shouting and cursing, and we get out and, yep, sure as day, the axle has snapped. A crowd gathers due to the noise. As I'm standing there freaked out by all of this, a small woman that I somehow recognize walks up and, yep, asks me if I'm all right. She had a Scottish accent and is walking a small black terrier. When the AA turns up, he tells us that if this had happened at speed on the motorway, there's a good chance that we would all be dead. We eventually got home via some ridiculous series of buses, and I sat eating in silence in the dining hall with my friend, both of us too messed up to say anything. I described the whole thing to him that morning, and for several weeks afterwards, he became quite distant, as though he mentally connected me with death itself or something. About a decade later, he caught up with me and the event came up in conversation. He found it much harder to talk about, but his comment has always struck me, I guess. He said that what I told him and what occurred that morning had forced him to see life in a very different way. Essentially, he'd had to face up to the possibility that there was more to this life than he was willing to consider, and that it frightened him. He'd even had a few nightmares about it over the ensuing years, as he said the sheer size of it all and what it meant has always scared me since then. I'm in my 40s now, and I find myself thinking about it every so often. I still, well, over 20 years later, find it very hard to describe what I truly feel. I just know that this life and this death are far larger than we can ever comprehend. But to finish it all, a couple of years ago I had to sit in the back seat of my brother's 2-door car on a quick journey. For the first time in my life, I had what I now know as a panic attack, and it was clearly linked to what I've just described. It was horrific, and I'll never sit in one of those ever again. Even thinking about it makes me slightly nauseous again. This stuff is buried very deep in our consciences. So last week I was cleaning the house and forgot that I had to pick up some beers for the house. I checked the time and it was about 6 p.m. I figured that I had a little time, but looked out the window and it was already dark. I figured that I would just head over to the nearest gas station and get back as quick as possible. It really shouldn't be an issue, I thought. So I start walking and I notice someone walking in front of me. I thought nothing of it and continued walking, but after a couple of blocks I saw one of the stray cats that I feed regularly, so I stopped and pet him for a good 5 to 10 minutes. I get up and continue walking, but I then noticed as I turned the corner that the man had stopped and seemed to be waiting for me to finish. I put my hood up and walked past, gripping the knife in my jacket pocket. I hear him behind me getting louder and louder as I started to speed walk. As I finally get to the gas station, I kind of take a breath and go to the ATM, checking behind me every so often, completely forgetting about the beer at this point. As I finish up, I turn around and he is running down the aisle at me. I round the corner and he nearly knocks over a shelf trying to get to me. Another gentleman notices and helps me to keep an eye on him and offers to even walk me home. I get all my things and wait for him to leave before I purchase my things and start walking back. Me and the kind gentleman start heading back and making small talk while keeping eyes on the guy in front of us. The gentleman says his goodbyes as his house was closer and said, "Do you have eyes on him?" I say yes and continue walking home. As I get a little closer to my house, I notice though that he dips off to the side of the road. I start walking a bit faster as I turn the corner to my house, and that was when I see him again behind me. I quickly run into my house, locking both locks on my door, and then I see him, basically breathing on my window. I was home completely alone, and I was terrified for hours. I don't know if he left at some point, because I never did check again, but I stayed awake that night with the phone by my side, ready to call 911. So I'm not really sure if this would be considered a paranormal story per se, but nothing else really makes sense. Let me explain. My family would go camping every chance that we got, and the place that we'd always go had no natural predators, at least nothing bigger than a fox. My dad specifically chose this spot so us kids, me and my 2 siblings, could sort of frolic through the woods without having to worry too much. This particular trip was during the May long weekend. There was still a considerable amount of snow, so my dad brought our ATVs and some sleds for us. It was the day after we had arrived, and my dad wanted to go on a little trip down the road that we came up. I asked if I could come, and he said sure. We both hopped on his quad, and we set out on our little trip. I forgot to mention too earlier that we had deer around this area. Nothing crazy, but the odd one would wander through our campsite every now and then. You could tell that they had no natural predators though, for sure, since they didn't run away when there was a human around even. But my siblings and I would always manage to get pretty close to one, before my parents yelled at us to stay away from them. Anyway, my dad and I were a few miles away from the campsite when we rounded a corner and came across one of the most gruesome sights that I've ever seen in my entire life. On the side of the road were the pieces of a deer, at least I think it was one. There was blood absolutely everywhere. Worse still, there was steam coming from the remains, which meant that this was a recent kill. My dad is usually a pretty calm guy. Not much can really rattle him, but I could tell that this freaked him out a lot. He was in the process of turning us around when this, screech came from the forest. It was so loud that we both flinched, and I remember searching the forest for the source, but my dad was in the process of hauling butt down the way that we came. It could have been a trick of the light, or because I was freaked out, and maybe I was seeing things, but I could have sworn that I saw something running alongside of us, but only for a second or two. I know that I sound absolutely crazy, but the thing genuinely looked like an absolutely enormous dog before it vanished into the trees. My dad traced back to the camp, and we were all packed up and headed to a different location by the end of that day. We never did go back to that campsite after this encounter too. I did ask my dad about it a couple of years ago, and he just said that it was because the new campsite was better than the old one, better trails and whatnot. But honestly, I think he was full of it. I think whatever we encountered that day scared the absolute heck out of him, and I think that whatever I saw, he must have as well. But I, for one, am actually thankful that we never went back. I'm not sure if I would be able to sleep at night, to be honest, after what I saw there. And it still plagues my memories to this day. I'm a 25-year-old male and I live in Utah. And, well, I guess I'm curious if any of you guys have seen anything like this before. Because I'm pretty sure that I saw a Wendigo or a Skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy, I get it, but I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical myself when it comes to the paranormal, but I definitely saw something. This happened to me when I was 17, and I was in high school and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door as well and shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain too that his house sat on what was sort of built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I know that sounds weird, but I hope you get it. I think that there were supposed to be more houses built down the street at some point to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in his cul-de-sac, even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story as well. So, I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while, we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird sort of gargling sound from the back porch. His room was the basement room with the window well to the back porch. This would happen maybe a couple of times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would ever be back there. This happened for years too, and in the end we just thought it was maybe the pipes or something. But one night haunts my friend and I still to this day. You see, my friend was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies and stuff. We decided to go on a music drive to just vibe out, and we hopped in his truck with high beams, swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. And when we did that, the light illuminated this, what I can only describe as thing. It looked like a person, but it definitely wasn't. It was naked, on all fours, abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in a really unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had been stretched onto it, but the part that still sends shivers down my spine is definitely its face. Its jaw hung open to its gaping black maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us, but as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind, into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other and just said, "Did you see that?" We were shaken, and we were afraid. Let's just say, too, that we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we just could hardly believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in the basement with guns all night, ready and waiting to hear the gargling and the dragging again. But that night, we never did. In fact, it was a really anticlimactic night in the end, and it was weird. I now don't live in that town anymore, but there are times when I visit there though, and that empty field, it still feels like it's watching and waiting. And as silly as this sounds, even though I can't see it obviously, I still feel inside of me like it's out there somewhere. So I live in Tennessee, and I used to go fishing regularly with two other guys before I left the state to go to college this past August. One spot that we really like to fish or just hang out at is in this kind of hidden road that leads to a dead end. The dead end is a super tiny parking lot, for a lack of a better term, only about maybe 5 spaces at the max, and we would go for a hiking trail, and it sort of forces you to turn around at one point. For an idea of how hidden this spot is actually, My friends and I have even thrown parties out there, and we've never been seen. We usually fish late at night there and also have a fire going since we're out super late anyway and it's in the middle of the woods. But one night, a bit past midnight, we had a few rods out along the water while we cooked some burgers on the fire. One friend decided that he wanted to try and toast his burger bun and everything, and the way Subway sort of toasts your sandwich is what he said. The bun got a bit too burned and was solid, so I told him to put whatever meat was left with the bait and to just toss the bun. It's totally dark, mind you, and we're right next to the water. The only light that we had was the fire, our phone screens, and occasionally the inside of our cars when we had to walk like 10 to 15 feet away to grab other fishing gear. We did, however, have headlamps, but we didn't use them too much because the battery life would drain super quickly if we used them. These headlamps were really powerful though, but the only constant light, the fire, it was only illuminating so much of the water in front of us. Only like 5 feet at most, so everything after that was pitch black but still water. So after putting the remaining meat in the bait bucket and mixing it, I told them that I had to take a leak. Before I walked away, my friend asked what to do with the burnt bun, and we both told him to just throw it in the water and that the fish would take care of the rest. As I turned away, I was able to catch my friend throwing the bun into the darkness out of the corner of my eye. I walked back towards the entrance of the woods across the road behind us and did my business. While I did, I heard them just sort of chatting away, cutting up, and the other friend giving the first friend trouble for burning the bun, I think. As they're laughing about it, I'm still in the middle of my leak, and I suddenly hear them stop laughing, and it got completely silent. As I finished up, though, I heard frantic shuffling with the sound of fishing lines being reeled in. The friend who threw the bread was sort of packing up his gear. Those who fish understand packing up is the worst part, but the other friend too, who carries, was now holding his gun and turned his headlamp and scanning the water in front of where they were set up. I obviously came back and asked him what was going on, and he quietly told me to help pack up our stuff and to kick the fire over into the water. Due to him being goofy, normally I asked no questions, and I did what he said. I remember picking up a piece of a hamburger bun next to the fire and tossing it into the water right in front of me as I was heading back to my car after kicking the fire over. And we were out of there faster than any other time that we left that fishing spot, really. Keep in mind that we're way out in the sticks, so it took us a bit to get to the closest gas station, which we use as a last stop to get anything that we need before heading to this spot. The gas station is closed, but the parking lot to the side of it is always lit up by the streetlights, so we pulled into there, and that was when I finally asked them what was going on, but they were both still wide-eyed and visibly shaken. It turns out, though, that while I was taking a leak, the piece of burnt bread my friend had thrown into the darkness actually flew back out of there and landed right at their feet. I saw my friend throw that bread and briefly saw it fly into the darkness across from us too. And also, the piece that I threw back into the water on my way out, that was actually the same piece. I always work closing shifts, so sometimes I wouldn't fish with them, but they'd fish together at other spots in the area along that lake. And they told me about their other encounters with weird and unexplainable things before, but I always just brushed them off. But this time it was different because, I saw my friend throw that bread into the water, and thinking back on it, that bread was definitely the one that I re-threw back into the water again. How was that possible? In December of 2005, me and a few high school friends were back home from our respective universities. We were juniors at the time and started a traditional winter break of freshman year to visit random state parks or smaller towns and explore them, along with the occasional mischief that we would end up getting into at some point. During these one-night trips, the three of us would all fall asleep in the back of my Tahoe on a large mattress pad. This kept us safe from the elements and set my paranoid mind at ease, should we be subjected to any foul play as well. But we decided this year to go to the Davy Crockett National Forest area. This area has many places that are extremely rural and desolate, which was exciting because we had previously found some interesting things and abandoned structures on our previous excursions. I'd used up my rest of my university printing credits to print detailed MapQuest pages for us so that we could use them for navigation while we were visiting. The drive was roughly 2 hours from our hometown. We decided to start the trip off in Lufkin, just east of the National Forest, to eat dinner and get a few things from Walmart. After dinner, we decided to mess around and get into our normal shenanigans like we always did. A few hours later, we found ourselves in Crockett, Texas, about an hour west of Lufkin. We planned on staying in a campground about halfway between the two cities, so I had a lot of flexibility when it came to time. We explored random roads and went into a few abandoned buildings before getting bored and wanting to go somewhere else. By this time, it was about 12:30 in the morning, that is, and at this point in the night, I needed an energy boost, so decided to stop at a gas station in Kennard, Texas, which was about 30 minutes east of Crockett. I go inside to buy a few snacks, energy drinks, a few cans, to give us some fuel for the rest of the night. With a nice buzz from the energy drink, we decided to get a little more adventurous, and we ventured down FM 357 south of Kennard. We come across a few Forest Service roads that ventured off into rural residential roads and other country roads. I pull off on the side of the road to check MapQuest and match the cross streets that we're at and give it to my other two friends to assist with navigation. After getting back onto the road, I notice that it's 1:30 in the morning and we all joke about how we are miraculously still awake. I decided to head down the next service road that we came across, and this is where things started to get pretty weird, and where parts of my memory are, well, erased, I guess, due to the sheer adrenaline that I had at that time. So after driving down a few more service roads and taking random turns, we get to a road that is much more narrow compared to the others. By this time, I get incredibly frustrated because it is almost 2:15 in the morning and I don't want to stumble into somebody else's front yard in a rural area in the middle of the night. So I decided to slowly proceed down the road when suddenly I noticed a faint light in the distance. Great, I thought, just great. I'm about to spook some random poor soul awake. And about 30 seconds later, I can tell that these are headlights now, but they suddenly disappeared. I thought someone may have turned up ahead, but I was very wrong. About 10 or 15 seconds later, I see what appeared to be a brand new black Chevy Suburban. The second that I put my high beams on it, its lights turned on and 3 men dressed in full suits jump out and sprint down the road past my car. It was almost like they were lifeless, but they didn't even look at my car. As they were running past me, the Suburban suddenly shifts into reverse and conducts the fastest reverse maneuver that I'd ever seen. At this point, I unholster and tell my friends to grab my AR. We were all scared and I had zero clue what we were about to come up on as we drove forward. Mind you, these were the days where cell phone coverage was pretty much non-existent in many areas of this region of the state, so we had no way to call for help if something did happen. As we reached the end of the road, we came upon FM 357, the same road that we'd originated from. I still don't know how this is possible. I mean, it felt like we were just venturing further and further away from that road, and we passed a US Forest Service fire station again on the way out, like we had on the way in, too. What I mean is that we traveled the same road twice somehow. I recently checked Google Maps for any US Forest Service fire station off of FM 357, and I cannot find any current or past historical data on it. The county tax assessor doesn't have any listings either. In any case, we got back on FM 357 and we decided to book it to downtown Crockett as we didn't feel comfortable with sleeping in a campsite after what had just happened. And I have since made sure to never venture down unknown roads without referencing GPS or maps at the very least. I am still processing that short but very weird and unsettling event. Where did those men come from? Why were they in suits in the middle of the forest? Where did the black Suburban go that vanished into the night? Me and my friends still occasionally talk about this incident, and no one can seem to come up with a sound explanation. The thing that bothers me the most, though, is I cannot find any evidence of this road that we were on. Google Earth software doesn't even have a road or satellite imagery that lines up with what happened, nor does it have evidence of a fire station or any structure for that matter. So, I don't know if we just went down the wrong road or if something really weird happened that night. So an old friend hit me up a little while ago, and I started reminiscing and remembered this. I believe that I've encountered the black-eyed children over a decade ago in rural Appalachia. This has always low-key disturbed me. Keeping in touch to this day, we've never brought it up again either. So we were at a local state park sort of place at between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. I remember that we were parked alongside the woods and some picnic tables. It was pretty desolate. We were technically trespassing, 17 female and 17 male at that time. And what we were doing there, you can probably leave to your imagination. But as our curfews were approaching and we were finishing up our time together, we experienced what I can only describe as a very ominous feeling. He was in the driver's seat preparing to start the car and pull off. The car doesn't start though. We sort of laugh it off as it wasn't the first time and we just talked. When suddenly, to the right, passenger side where I was sitting, we see faint lights coming out of the woods. The ominous feeling intensified obviously, and emerging from the woods, there are 4 or 5 children, younger than us, like appearing to be maybe 7 to 11 years old. And now, I'm not going to claim that they had black eyes because, truthfully, it was dark and I don't remember as I was pretty shook up, but I didn't read about the black-eyed children lore or phenomenon until years later, which described everything else that we experienced that night. All I can say is that they were definitely not normal. They didn't belong, I guess is the best way to put it. The cabins at the park were not occupied. They weren't even getting rented out as it was autumn and winter. We were miles from the park's hotel. There were no adults either. They were absolutely just completely out of place. What were the lights? Well, I don't know, but the closest thing that I can compare them to are like glow sticks, as if they had opened a package of those novelty glow sticks that included bracelets, necklaces, or wands sort of thing, but it wasn't like they were having fun or goofing off or anything. They just stopped, stood there, and sort of ominously stared at us. He tried asking what they were doing, if they were lost or where their parents were, but there was no response. The oldest-looking male child, a bit heavyset with a grey hoodie on, approached the vehicle just in front where the passenger headlight corner would be. My friend started really freaking out at this moment. He locked the doors and was like, "Heck no, we gotta go." Eventually, thankfully, the car starts too. But the children, they don't move, and the kid stays put in front of the car. My friend eventually yells to the kid, "I'm going to run you over." The boy slowly backs away, raises his arm, and points at us as we were leaving. We didn't look back, and we obviously never saw them again, but it is one of the weirdest nights that I've ever had. It's been about a year since my husband and I had an encounter with this tall, mysterious creature, but I haven't been able to let it go since. It's been plaguing my dreams and keeping me from being outside at night even. So I thought that I'd share it here in hopes that anyone might have similar stories or encounters. It was the middle of winter and everything was powdered in white. Life had gotten quite slow, so my husband and I decided to take our 2 small children to his parents' house to enjoy a date night together. My in-laws only live 4 blocks away from us on the very bottom of a mountain in Utah County, so it wasn't a far drive. It was around 4 in the evening when we left our kids with my in-laws, and we had only planned to pick up some sushi and head back home. But by the time that we were done, And back at my in-laws, it was around 5:45 in the evening. The sun was shining brightly, but was about to make its way out for the night. We gathered up the kids, put their coats on, and headed out to the car. My father-in-law and 19-year-old brother-in-law walked out with us to say goodbye to the kids. As we were buckling them into their seats, we heard this horrendous noise. It sounded like a woman crying, a child laughing, and a bird sort of cawing all at once. My father-in-law looked at me and said, "Are you hearing this?" My husband said, "Yeah, you heard that too?" My brother-in-law mentioned that he could hear it too, and I just stood there, silent, trying to dissect whatever this sound was and where it was coming from. And then I heard my father-in-law say, "Look on the mountain." He was pointing up about 100 yards away, and I quickly grabbed the glasses from the top of my head for a better look. And there it was. Something big, completely black, and it was hunched over a bush. We stared and listened to its cry in the silence. I said, "I'm getting my binoculars," to my father-in-law, and he turned to run to the house. We stared and listened to its cry in silence. "I'm going to go and get my binoculars," said my father-in-law, and he turned to run to the house. The unbearable sound stopped, though, and the creature slowly stood upright to look at us. Whatever it was long, skinny, all black, and it could have been maybe 8 to 9 feet tall. It had the body of a man, sort of, but disproportionately skinny and extremely long. Its arms were incredibly long, in fact. They definitely passed the knees, and it had no facial features. No nose, no eyes, just complete darkness. We collectively stood in silence, staring at each other and at this thing, and about 15 seconds had passed. It began to quickly float up the mountain. I'm not talking float as in was so fast that you couldn't see its legs. I'm talking literally floating up the mountain, like it was levitating. My husband describes it was about 20 miles per hour in speed, but it wasn't long before whatever it was completely dissipated into the tip of the mountain. I will never forget that day, and I have not seen anything like it since. In fact, I hope I never really see anything like it ever again. In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the boundary waters in northern Minnesota and southern Ontario. These are a massive wilderness area of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts and were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical too, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here is the account in full. So my crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us in total, the maximum allowed in a group per our permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adult advisors, scoutmasters, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler, but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend the route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so a waterfall is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of, well, something. So we visited the falls and we camped near it. That evening, I had the boys working on a camp setup while the advisors worked on fire for the dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of down trees, brush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left when, out of nowhere, I hear the most unearthly scream or roar that I'd ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks and I was frozen. The second scream was much closer, and the third even closer than that. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever this was, it was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous at this and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body, but the fifth scream almost physically hurt me, but it snapped me back to reality and I ran instantly back to the camp. My crew heard it too, but I had no idea what to tell them. I claimed that it might have been a boar, but there's no boar up here, and the advisors, they knew that I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards from camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock up at my head height, so about 6 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay too. But the tarp wasn't strung up, and that's important because it was just sort of loosely over me. It must have been around 3 or 4 in the morning when I was awakened by what sounded to me like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet, as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from the brush to the granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footfalls as it walked right through camp. And straight towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing and I don't know what to do. In no time, though, whatever it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing too, loud and sort of congested sounding. I could smell the musk and I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. And it was time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the tarp off of my head, and as I did this, my left hand touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The muscularity of this thing, though, was impressive. Bodybuilder status pectoral is what I touched, and it all happened in a second. But as soon as my hand made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such thick debris. By the time that I got my headlamp on it, it was gone. Unfortunately, my crew had slept through it all, so I just read until the sun came up, and in the end I decided not to mention it. The next day we moved on a few miles toward base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designated by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole, really. We were just arriving and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling and he came running back to the camp, still pulling his pants up, and said that he'd seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if maybe it was a bear, and he said absolutely not, that he'd hunted bear for years and it was definitely not one. It was a monkey, and it was apparently about 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched the chest and I was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close to about 9 feet up. So, whatever this thing was it stalking us? Was there more than one? The boys are definitely now scared, which meant that it was time to mitigate. I suggest a night paddle. Nobody's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack up and set out around 8 p.m. and paddled by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near to base so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfoundland Lake by a small pinch and a channel of water that's not very deep or wide, but there's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a basketball came flying out of the woods on the right side and only narrowly missed the bow of the canoe that I was steering. There's no cliff there either. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line, whatever it was. At this, we paddled like absolute demons. We paddled to the center of the Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled to base camp, and at that, we just ended our expedition. They didn't want to talk about what happened, and to be honest, I was completely fine with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day, and that was that. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard helping crews offload. My buddy Justin got back that day from a trip in the same area that we had been in, Bear Loop, and as I was helping him put a boat on the rack, I noticed that he had a distant look, almost 1,000-yard stare, if you catch my drift, and I asked how his trip went, and he said that it was all good until they hit Knife Lake or Newfoundland Lake. He said that they were being messed with for 2 nights on Knife and then had a rock thrown at them in the Newfound Pinch. And sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after that, crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night too, there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then, from the back corner of the room, I hear a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who'd been there for over a decade, and all he said was, "It's about time somebody else seen one." I asked how long he'd known that they were there, and he said that he's been encountering them for like 10 years now. But then he said they talk to me. This shocked me. Like a language, I asked? No, they communicate telepathically, he said. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you, but they can read you, and they like it when you're afraid. It's like a game to them, is what he said. What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me, but what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and also apparently parapsychological abilities. That they can read human emotion as clear as pages in a book. That they know our species, perhaps better than we even know ourselves. So my wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect the first few months to be as well. Painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. Unusual things started happening, though, several months ago. One day, as I was getting home from after work, I passed by a strange truck 2 or 3 houses down from ours. I say strange for a few reasons, too. I mean, we know literally everyone in our small neighborhood, and I'd never seen this truck or person before. There's no reason for through traffic to come down our street, and the truck was also driving very slowly, like put it in drive but don't press on the gas slowly. As I pulled into the driveway, the truck flipped a U-turn and came back towards my house. Getting out of my car, the truck crawled by and the driver stared daggers at me as he passed, and then just sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances, and I like to think that I don't scare easily, but something about this guy's eyes just gave me a really bad feeling. Now, obviously, this was weird. I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her that we should be more mindful about security. When I told her the type of truck, my wife said that same truck drove by and the guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought that he was just being creepy and checking me out. I tried to tease her a bit, to lighten the mood up, calling her cocky for assuming any guy driving by was checking her out. I just didn't want to freak her out, but I was definitely freaked out myself. Anyway, we saw the truck a few more times over the next couple of weeks, either driving by slowly or parked down the block and facing our yard. But one day, the truck stopped driving by and we haven't seen it since. I sort of dismissed the whole thing as being just paranoid. But then, other things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife and I have been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always around 10 or 11 p.m., and always a soft but distinct tapping. It sounds like knocking with a single knuckle, I guess, on the metal part of the screen door. The first time that my wife and I heard the tapping together was last weekend. We were in the front room playing with our daughter around maybe 9:30, just about to settle her down for bed, and our front room has a large, almost floor-to-ceiling window running the length of the wall next to the front door, which faces the street. We're all sitting on the floor with our backs to the window, reading our daughter a book when we heard it. Tapping. Now, our house is older, creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was so distinctly intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted up out of the room. I had my wife and daughter lock themselves in a back room while I turned on all the lights, and I also did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything and was ready to dismiss the whole thing as just paranoia over something that probably had an innocent explanation. That is, until last night. So around 9:45, we heard our daughter making noise in the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down, but when it became clear that she wouldn't, I got up to put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize this next part, so bear with me. So this room is on the side of our house, but the exterior wall just out a bit in a sort of L shape, and the corner of this L is made up of windows. If you're standing in the door to the room, you're directly across from these windows in one corner, and there's a rocking chair in the other corner pointed towards the front of the house. One window faces the street and the other faces our neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside of the house directly underneath as well. So I was sitting in the chair, getting my daughter to settle down again. I had a lamp on, so the room was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up to put her in her crib when something caught my eye. There was a figure standing about a foot away from the window in the bare space between the shrubs and the house, and they were staring at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light grey hoodie standing a few feet away on the other side of the glass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife and I's bedroom, leaving her while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside the house and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room. I was peering out the windows into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and make a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking security cameras and going from room to room, looking out windows into the night, hoping that I would catch something, but also not hoping that I would see anything that could explain what happened. This morning, I went outside to the spot where the figure would have been standing. I thought, or hoped maybe, that there was a plant or something that I mistook for a person. When I got to the spot, I realized the figure had to be standing exactly in a bare patch of ground about maybe 2 feet in diameter, directly in front of that window. Part of me is still hoping that I'm just being paranoid. The mind can play tricks on you in the dark after all, seeing things that aren't really there, especially when you're a sleep-deprived new parent, right? But with everything that's been happening, I just can't shake the feeling that there was actually someone out there last night, watching us. I really do hope that I am wrong, though. It's taken me years to work up the courage to post this story to strangers because, well, the events that took place all those years ago left me puzzled and, frankly, disturbed. It's perhaps best if I provide some background context because it may help strengthen my story and people will hopefully believe me as well. I know that a lot of people claim to have a true story about strange encounters in the woods, and I don't want people to accuse me of making this all up. I swear to you that this really did happen. It's not supernatural, it took place during the daytime, and the monster is very much human. So when I was about 13 or maybe 14 years old, back in 2003 to 2004, I went on a camping trip with my mother and stepfather and my 4 younger siblings. We were not a very well-off family. In fact, we were pretty poor, to be honest. I never went on holidays abroad, and we would always just go camping, usually to the same campsite, which felt like miles away, but was in reality less than 10 miles from the city where we lived. We had been there a few times previously, and we knew the campsite and the surrounding area fairly well. It was, all in all, a pretty safe and familiar place. On this occasion, everything was going as normal. Truthfully, I sort of hated camping. My parents would always argue too when it came to putting up the tent. It was pretty boring being in the woods, and I would normally be the one entertaining my siblings. I hated not having electricity, access to proper toilets and showers, etc. It could be quite fun looking back, and I do treasure the memories that I have with my stepdad, who is no longer with us. But all in all, it was just a rather uncomfortable experience. Usually, though, we would go on long hikes or bike rides, with my stepdad using maps to charter our way to a small village, promising to get us all ice cream when we got there, which was a real treat as we never normally had it. On this camping trip, we were going to go on a 10-mile bike ride. Both my parents had their own bikes, along with my sister and I. My stepdad's bike had the small trailer where my 3 younger siblings, all under the age of 5, were sitting. It was hard work going on these epic long bike rides, but I did enjoy being in the middle of the woods surrounded by nature. This was one of the things that I actually liked. And I mean, we weren't in the middle of nowhere by any means, but it was pretty remote. Remote enough for it to be inaccessible to public transport. Only forest ranger type vehicles could access the roads. They weren't real roads paved with tarmac, more like dirt roads which were really only suited for bicycles. During all the times that we went camping, we never saw any other vehicles go down these roads too. On this day though, we were all cycling down this road when suddenly we hear the sounds of a vehicle coming up slowly behind us. My stepdad is in front of us when he stops and tells us to move aside to let the vehicle come past. But there's a sense of urgency and confusion in his tone as he's unsure and why there's even a vehicle there. The vehicle passes us and we're expecting to see a forest ranger vehicle, like a 4x4 pickup or a Land Rover type of vehicle, but instead we see an East State station wagon type of car with a long body and a large trunk with a window at the back. In the back of this station wagon, I also see several large trash bags, and it was a very strange sight. I may only be a teenager, but this is a sight that sets off alarm bells for several reasons, and I knew it at the time too. Like, first of all, this is not a car that is designed to go off roads in the woods like this. Second, as previously mentioned, we've never encountered any vehicles down this bike road before, like ever. Thirdly, the person driving is clearly not lost as they didn't stop to ask for directions. Fourth, there are big black trash bags in the back of the car that look very suspicious. What I mean by this point is that they're full and tied up very tightly. We could all see into the back of the car, and I didn't see anything poking out of the bag to indicate that it was full of garbage or anything. And fifthly, the driver looked very rough, and I don't mean to sound rude, but he looked really mean. I can't recall his features, just that he didn't look like a friendly person that belonged to the countryside. He wore dark clothing, and I think he was clean-shaven and had very short hair. I wish that I remembered more about exactly what this man looked like. As if this incident couldn't get any stranger, though, what took place next has left such an impression on me that I still recall the sense of fear that I felt at the time as I share this. The car drives on several more feet, then the driver stops. For what feels like the longest time in my entire life, nothing happens. We're all just sort of watching this car dumbfounded. My stepdad has told us to remain still. He's really serious all of a sudden too, as he's assessing the situation. Then, the car's reverse light comes on and the car starts reversing up to us. My stepdad, who was in the army for several years and was one of the toughest guys that I knew, goes into full-on panic mode. He tells us to run. We don't even get on our bicycles to ride. Instead, we all flee on foot, running with our bicycles through the woods until we find a railway bridge which we had previously passed over. We never looked back, and I have no idea if the man in the car got out to go after us or anything. I don't know if he just continued driving. I have no idea who he was or what was in those bags. But why he reversed that day was strange. We never really spoke about what happened after that. I know it was something that seriously scared my stepdad because of his response, and it's left me frightened about who I might encounter in the woods until this very day. So I live in Virginia in a pretty rural area. My house is a townhome in a neighborhood right next to a middle school. I've lived in this house for over 10 years now and frequently went on walks during the daytime all around the neighborhood itself, plus the surrounding buildings and the woods, but I've never gone on a walk at night here. After starting college, I got very accustomed to taking walks around my campus at night when the weather was nice. So now that I'm home for winter break and Virginia is in one of its weirdly warm winter weeks, I decided that I may as well go on a walk at night here, since it's a safe area and night walks are almost daily routines for me now. So I leave my home at around midnight, not pretty late. I walk over to the middle school and I sit down on the track. The track is a concrete oval going around the soccer field. I'm just sitting there relaxing, listening to music with one earbud in. I also had a lit candle on the ground in front of me, which sounds kind of weird of me to have, now that I mention it, I know, but lighting candles while I sit and chill somewhere outside is just a habit I developed from having a ton of candles and being unable to light them in my room at college. Anyway, it was around this point that I hear what sounded like a cough, so I instantly stop my music and start looking around. I don't see anything, but I'm an extremely paranoid person, so I'm still very on edge, even though everything seems fine. I just sit there doing nothing for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and I start settling back down, thinking that maybe the cough was just leaves in the nearby woods between my neighborhood and this soccer field. So I'm almost fully relaxed, but then I heard the cough again. Then I see something sprint on its back legs across the field faster than I've ever seen anything move before, and it gets to the other end of the field and then continues to stand there on its hind legs. I couldn't see it super well because it was dark and far away. Since I just heard coughing and it was running on 2 legs, I initially thought that it must have been a person, but when it was standing still, I could see that it was too large and weirdly proportioned to be a human. It was also screeching the whole time, sort of, like an incredibly loud horror movie creature screeching that made my ears ring. It looked like its back was to me, so I took the opportunity to pack up and sprint home at that, not wanting to hear the sound anymore, and obviously I was pretty freaked out. I'm also physically disabled and I can move around just fine, but never very quickly. I literally cannot think of another time in my life where I have ever run that fast, though. Now, the only sort of paranormal thing that I believe in is plain old ghosts, so as soon as I got home, I texted all of my friends about it and Googled all that I could. Everyone that I texted reassured me that it was probably just an injured or diseased animal, since that can make deer act weird like that. So that was a little bit reassuring, but at the time, I'm Googling about deer running on their hind legs and screeching their heads off. And while it's a decently documented occurrence, none of the pictures and the videos on any websites are anywhere near what I saw. In fact, the only accounts of experiences just like mine are posts and on other subreddits, and they were about skinwalkers and stuff. Also, 2 additional details that I should add are that, 1, I'm just assuming that it was a deer based on its size. It didn't have antlers or anything. I couldn't really tell what it was, and I'm mainly going with deer because I'm very skeptical about paranormal topics and I don't want to assume that it was anything other than a deer. And 2, I've read descriptions of deer running on their hind legs and I've watched videos of it, in fact. But none of the videos that I've seen really match up with just how strangely fast this thing was moving. Like, it was basically a blur running past me. Anyway, to this day I still don't know what it was, but I just wanted to get this out there. Maybe someone knows Appalachian animals better than I do and can reassure me that it was just a sick deer or something. In any case, I hope all of you guys had a happy new year and are all doing well.